Speak to the earth, and it shall teach thee. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Oh my God, we are all going to die, ladies and gentlemen. Boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents here on Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live and almost dead from the 10x10x10 tangent cube of science. Nestled amongst the dusty bones of a whole bunch of other stuff that also died a long time ago, high atop the Edwards Plateau, where we are all going to die. That's my coronavirus update. Knocked it out in the beginning of the show.
Very nice, very nice.
All right, we got a great show for you guys. We're going to keep doing our deep dive. This is part 6.
I think so.
I think part 6 of the deep dive into Velikovsky's Earth in Upheaval. We also have a couple of news stories from Kyle. We got listener emails and communications, and we got some one-up boxes.
Yeah.
And of course, as always, well, not as always, but as almost always, we have our good friend, the Watcher from deep beneath his secret space station in secret outer space. How you doing, buddy? What's going on out there? You saving people from the coronavirus yet?
I'd do what I can. I'd feel a lot better, though, if you didn't set the bar so high for us right at the beginning. Like, it's always going to be a great show, and then we have to give them a great show.
Yeah, well, I just expect it to be a great show.
They don't deserve it.
I don't actually know if it's going to be a great show. I just assume, stacks of assumptions here on the Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Yep.
I mean,
you got to be positive.
Yeah. I mean, what am I going to say? We have it's an all right show.
If you're going to skip one, this might be the one.
Yeah, I don't think that would work. Also, I wanted to tell people we had a fantastic interview with Soraya from Where Did the Road Go?
Yeah.
So I encourage anybody who hasn't heard that yet to go check it out. You can find his feed. Just search his podcast, Where Did the Road Go? Or you can find him on YouTube. It's the most recent post called Ancient Aliens with the Snake Brothers. Kyle and I have already been talking about we want to follow up episode on that, and I've actually sent Soraya a message. I'm like, dude, we both have listened to the show, and we're like, dang it, we forgot to say this, we forgot to say that. Yeah. So we're like, we want to do this, we want to do it again. We want a second chance. So so maybe look forward to another one like that coming soon. And also, there was a great Patreon discussion we had with Soraya that was basically just a continuation of that same discussion with a little bit of UFO thrown in there, some UFO story. So if you're a Patreon supporter of Where Did the Road Go, you can hear that as well. All right, let's go ahead and do space weather news from spaceweather.com. Very short space weather news today. It's the sun is blank again. Less than 3 days after it first appeared, radioactive sunspot AR2758 has disintegrated, leaving the sun blank. Solar minimum conditions are in effect, and the spotless days counter is incrementing again. Current conditions: a very low solar wind speed of 313.8 kilometers per second, but a relatively high density of 10.5 protons per cubic centimeter.
Okay, so I've got another story here from our good buddy Phil Plait at Bad Astronomy.
The Bad Astronomer.
This is from sci-fi.com. He says, the sun has been quiet for a long time, but that is finally changing. Not according to Space Weather News. The last peak of magnetic activity for our star was in 2014 to 15, and it's declined to basically nothing since then, but new research indicates it's on the upswing again. The sun has a complicated magnetic field, to say the least. The Earth's is relatively simple, like a big dipole bar magnet on a large scale. Though on the small scale, it's way more complex. But the sun doesn't really have a large-scale organized field. Instead, it has zillions of little fields that all form deep inside it. This is tied with convection in the sun. Here he goes again on convection.
Yeah.
Hopefully he doesn't have to do a mea culpa on the sun's convection.
I was wrong. Sorry about how wrong I was.
No, but this again, this got a lot of good information.
Yeah. No, the guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. We like this guy.
Yeah.
Down near the core,
when he's wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Where the energy is generated, conditions in the sun become such that the energy is transported by parcels of super hot ionized gas called plasma, rising due to buoyancy. This creates huge towering conveyor belts of plasma moving up and down inside the sun, reaching all the way to the surface. But a basic rule of physics says that moving charged particles create a magnetic field. So each one of these convection cells has its own magnetic field, and there are a lot of these cells inside the sun. Thousands. For reasons still not well understood, the sun's magnetic field waxes and wanes on an 11-year cycle, strengthening to a peak, then dropping down to a minimum about 5.5 years later, only to strengthen once again. Not only that, but after one of those minima, the next maximum has the opposite polarity, switching the magnetic north and south poles. So really the complete cycle is 22 years, a double cycle including the polarity swaps. Like I said, it's complicated. So he has a graph here showing the different cycles going back to the 1950s. He says, when the magnetism is near its peak, we start to see lots of activity on the sun's surface. Magnetic field lines from various convection cells can become entangled, and if they snap, they can release huge blasts of energy called solar flares. These can also trigger even bigger coronal mass ejections, where billions of tons of hydrogen can get launched into space at huge velocities. And all of these are associated with sunspots, dark regions on the surface. These are due to the magnetic field lines embedded in the gas, keeping that gas from sinking back into the sun once it cools. Cooler gas doesn't emit as much light, so they appear dark.
Yeah.
I didn't know that before I read this. I lost my spot. They're actually still really hot, just not quite as hot as the surrounding gas, so they look dark by contrast.
Right.
Sunspots are tracers of solar magnetic activity then. During a maximum, there can be dozens on the face of the sun, and during a minimum, they can drop to zero. That's where we are now. There have been very few sunspots at all for the past few years. Which finally brings me back to the topic here. That looks like it's about to change. Astronomers looked at the sun using an instrument on the space-based Solar Dynamics Observatory called the Helioseismic and Magnetic Imager. Magnetic fields affect the light leaving the sun's surface, polarizing it, in a way that can be used to measure the strength and even the polarity of those fields. They looked at a bunch of different regions on the sun to measure their magnetic polarity. Remember, each cycle from the sun has the opposite polarity as the last one. In this case, the last one that peaked in 2015 or so is called cycle 24, and the next one that will be flipped is called cycle 25. Using HMI, they found 33 different regions on the sun's surface conforming to the expected polarity of cycle 25. Moreover, these regions were generally at high latitudes nearer the sun's poles. That's where the first magnetic regions tend to appear in a new cycle. They start forming at high latitudes and then over the next few years form at lower latitudes. This is called a solar butterfly diagram due to the shape of the curve you get when you graph their locations over time. They therefore conclude that cycle 25 is finally getting itself started inside the sun and will return to a period of higher solar activity as the result. I'll note that this is more than just of academic interest, way more. Flares and CMEs are extraordinarily violent events, and they can directly affect the Earth. Flares generate X and gamma rays that can create electromagnetic pulses inside satellites, damaging or even destroying them. CMEs carry their own magnetic fields with them, and when they sweep over the Earth, their fields can couple with ours, causing all kinds of havoc, like huge electric currents inside the Earth that can cause power outages over large regions.
Yeah.
Anyway, we knew most of that, but
Cool.
I was, they released that image, that high definition image of the all the little cells.
Yeah.
And so I was imagining this is what he's talking about. Like each one of those things is coming up. It has its own electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
Right.
That is cool.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize that's the way it worked. So.
Yeah, that each cell, and then each one of those cells is enormous.
Right.
So yeah, and the thing about the sunspots, for some reason being cooler than the sun, it's weird. Like they're this area of heightened electromagnetic and electrical activity, but they also seem to be a hole in that convection layer. Right.
So the idea that I got from what he's saying is that they cool down and normally would drop back down, but for some reason the magnetic fields are holding them up at the surface, right?
Yeah.
So we see them cooling down, but for some reason, when there are a bunch of sunspots, it's hotter.
Right.
What's the deal with that?
Because they're throwing off
the
flare, because the sunspot the sunspots cause these like the flares will be these big. It'll be a big electromagnetic loop carrying a whole bunch of plasma, right? And those things are all fluctuating. And if they cross, if that.
I was trying to do that quietly. So I didn't realize there's so much ice in there. Sorry.
So if that loop, that electromagnetic plasma loop crosses and it touches, bam, it like shorts itself out and then it hurls all this material. And those happen over the sunspots because there's this, they're trying to link across it like it's an arcing. I don't really know. No one really knows how it works.
It's really cool.
But it's, that's the standard model explanation that I've seen for that. So
yeah. So thanks for that, Phil Plate.
Yeah.
A full plate of sun information here at sci-fi.com. And I've got one more. And a lot of people in the Snake Forest have been posting this article, talking about this article. So, for those of you who have already read this, bear with me. We've got to report this. This is from phys.org, which is phys.org. And this is
it's not fizz like
fizz.
Like F-I-Z-Z. This is a soda article.
Yeah, researchers find evidence of a cosmic impact that caused destruction of one of the world's earliest human settlements. This is March 7th by Sonia Fernandez of the University of California in Santa Barbara. Before the Takba Dam impounded the Euphrates River in northern Syria in the 1970s, an archaeological site named Abu Huraira, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Or Abu Huraira?
I've heard it pronounced that way, but I checked it on howtopronounce.com and the recording of the guy was Abu Huraira.
Huraira.
And it does have a Y in it.
Okay. Cool.
So I'm going to go with that.
Yeah.
Abu Huraira bore witness to the moment ancient nomadic people first settled down and started cultivating crops. A large mound marks the settlement, which now lies under Lake Assad. But before the lake formed, archaeologists were able to carefully extract and describe much material, including parts of houses, food, and tools, an abundance of evidence that allowed them to identify the transition to agriculture nearly 12,800 years ago. It was one of the most significant events in our Earth's cultural and environmental history. Abu Huraira, it turns out, has another story to tell. Found among the cereals and grains and splashed on early building material and animal bones was melt glass, some features of which suggest it was formed at extremely high temperatures, far higher than what humans could achieve at the time, or that could be attributed to fire, lightning, or volcanism. Quote, to help with perspective, such high temperatures would completely melt an automobile in less than a minute, said James Kinnett, a UC Santa Barbara emeritus professor of geology. Such intensity, he added, could only have resulted from an extremely violent, high-energy, high-velocity phenomenon, something on the order of a cosmic impact. Now, Kinnett is of the Comet Research Group, right?
Yes, right.
Okay, so he's
Alan West and Kinnett.
James Kinnett.
James Kinnett and yes.
Yeah, okay. So based on materials collected before the site was flooded, Kinnett and his colleagues contend Abu Huraira is the first site to document the direct effects of a fragmented comet on a human settlement. These fragments are all part of the same comet that likely slammed into Earth and exploded in the atmosphere at the end of the Pleistocene epoch, according to Kinnett. This impact contributed to the extinction of most large animals, including mammoths, and American horses and camels, the disappearance of the North American Clovis culture, and to the abrupt onset of the end glacial Younger Dryas cooling episode. The team's findings are highlighted in a paper published in the Nature journal Scientific Reports. Quote, our new discoveries represent much more powerful evidence for very high temperatures that could only be associated with a cosmic impact, said Kinnett, who with his colleagues first reported evidence of such an event in the region in 2012. I guess that was the first Syria paper they did in 2012.
Watcher, can you find out, let's make sure what Dr. Kinnett's first name is. That would be good to, if you could find that.
Kinnett
please.
Of the Comet Research Group.
Yeah.
Abu Huraira lies at the easternmost sector of what is known as the Younger Dryas boundary, strewn field, which encompasses about 30 other sites in the Americas, Europe, and parts of the Middle East. These sites hold evidence of massive burning, including a widespread carbon-rich black matte layer that contains millions of nanodiamonds, high concentrations of platinum, and tiny metallic spherules formed at very high temperatures. What?
I'm just saying, nanodiamonds, like this original thing about these melt glass things being made in house fires. I'm just like, yeah, but what about the nanodiamonds? Where did the platinum group metals come from?
Yeah.
Magnetic spherules get made in house fires? I don't know. I really thought that paper was ridiculous. So I'm glad that this one has come out as a response.
Yeah. So the YDB impact hypothesis has gained more traction in recent years because of many new discoveries, including a very young impact crater beneath the Hiawatha Glacier of the Greenland ice sheet, and high-temperature melt glass and other similar evidence at an archaeological site in Pilaoco, not sure how to pronounce that, located in southern Chile. Quote, the Abu Huraira village would have been abruptly destroyed, Kenneth said. Unlike the evidence from Pilaoco, which was limited to human butchering of large animals up to but not younger than the YDB impact burn layer, Abu Huraira shows direct evidence of the disaster on this early human settlement. An impact or an airburst must have occurred sufficiently close to send massive heat and molten glass over the entire early village, Kennett noted. The glass was analyzed for geochemical composition, shape, structure, formation, temperature, magnetic characteristics, and water content. Results from the analysis showed that it formed at very high temperatures and included minerals rich in chromium, iron, nickel, sulfides, titanium, and even platinum and iridium-rich melted iron, all of which formed in temperatures higher than 2,200 degrees Celsius.
Oof.
Quote, the critical materials are extremely rare under normal temperatures, but are commonly found during impact events, Kennett said. According to the study, the melt glass was formed, quote, from the nearly instantaneous melting and vaporization of regional biomass, soils, and floodplain deposits, followed by instantaneous cooling, end quote. Additionally, because the materials found are consistent with those found in the YDB layers at other sites across the world, it's likely that they resulted from a fragmented comet as opposed to impacts caused by individual comets or asteroids. Quote, a single major asteroid impact would not have caused such widely scattered materials like those discovered at Abu Huraira. This is critical, I think, of the whole...
Because it's a bombardment of explosions and impacts?
Yes.
Okay.
The largest cometary debris clusters are proposed to be capable of causing thousands of airbursts. And this is Kennett speaking here. They're quoting that I'm quoting here. The largest cometary debris clusters are proposed to be capable of causing thousands of airbursts within a span of minutes across one entire hemisphere of the Earth. The YDB hypothesis proposed this mechanism to account for the widely dispersed coeval materials across more than 14,000 kilometers of the northern and southern hemispheres. Our Abu Huraira discoveries strongly support a major impact event from such a fragmented comet, end quote.
Yeah. Okay, so Watcher says Douglas Kennett of Pennsylvania.
Douglas, okay.
And James Kennett of UC Santa Barbara are both members of the Comet Research
Okay,
Group.
so
it's probably James Kennett, but it could be Douglas. James Kennett is the one that I've heard more often.
Yeah. I don't think it ever says his first name. Oh, yeah, James.
James.
Yeah, I must have read that because I read the entire story. And there it is. Obviously, I don't listen to myself read these. I'm only focused on making sure I can read. But yeah,
that's why he has to read them beforehand.
Yeah, I have
so that he knows what they say.
I have to read them beforehand so that I know what's going on in the story. Then I can read it on the show
without paying attention.
To what I'm reading, so that I make sure I can read, and then I can tell you what it was saying.
Yeah, you did a great job.
Okay, so we know this stuff, right? I mean, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast and on Cosmography and everything, but I think
George Howard's been on here talking about it.
Yeah. I just love the brevity in this story, or in Kennett's direct quote there, where they're talking about, and this is one of the main things that the critics say was, oh, you know, if we got hit by something big enough to do all this damage, then it would have wiped out everything and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
You know? And that's the straw man. They're trying to say it wasn't one big chunk of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. The idea that this fragmenting comet can make thousands of impactors that just blanket one side of the planet in a matter of minutes. That's what they're talking about.
Yeah,
here.
and it's a totally different kind of event. Yeah, than like a single gigantic impactor.
Right.
Like what supposedly happened at the KT boundary.
Right. So this whole idea of like, well, where's your crater is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yep. Even though we've probably got one now. It's still ridiculous. Yeah.
Of course, likely there would be some larger chunks that could have left some craters. But even if there were big craters made in North America, most likely because of that it was such a widespread event, all of the burning, the rapid melting, all of that stuff, those craters could have been completely eroded in a matter of years.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there was so much melting.
Yeah. So anyway, I just
I agree. I liked his quote, and the critical stuff he was saying about this was, you know, this is a widespread bombardment event of a fragmenting object, not a single impactor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree that's good stuff.
Yeah, so thanks everybody that sent me that story, but I had already read it.
Yeah, it was posted many times in the chat. It was sent to us on Twitter, sent to us on email. Yep. So a lot of people were super excited about it, and that's great because we were too.
And another major thing is that it is getting better publicity. Like I've seen it on some major news sites that I've never seen stuff like that on before, and so I was very happy for the Comet Research Group that they're getting getting some traction here with these stories, and they're being more widely spread than in the past. So very good.
Yeah, and it kind of fits the media fad right now of, oh my God, we're all going to die.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. That's right.
All right, so let's go to some emails here. First one I want to kind of do a bit of a mea culpa for Matt, who emailed us about the website last week. And, you know, afterward, I was like, hey, man, I like my website, right?
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I talked to it with the Snake Forest. I talked to Kyle about it, and people were like, dude, what's wrong with you? This is like you're doing the value for value system all wrong. You're doing it wrong. This is how it works. So what I want to say to you, Matt, and I'm going to email you too. I'm going to reply to this email and tell you this. Is that it would be great if you wanted to build us a website and make it a community thing. I mean, do whatever you want with it. You know, you can't, I'm going to keep our website. You can integrate that or whatever. But the reason I got to keep our website, at least for now, is because it also controls the feed. Right. So the source for the RSS file for the entire podcast comes from this website that I maintain. OK. But if you wanted to build a Brothers of the Serpent style website that had like community stuff in there where people could post things, like maybe there was a forum in there or something. I don't know, whatever you think of. The Snake Force was telling me, hey man, that would be awesome to like have another resource on there. And if you wanted to do that and it was cool, we would talk about it on the podcast, tell people to go check it out. And you know, because what he was also I'll tell people what he was also saying here was that, he wanted to have it work as a business deal as well. And so like, he was like, you know, if you tell people about the website and also that he hosts and builds websites for people and we get him business, you know, we'll have a business deal. So I'm totally down with that if you want to do that, man. So I think that's a great idea. And, you know, it's the value for value. So you go to it, you know, build what you think is cool and we will promote it on the show. So,
yeah.
Right.
And we'll provide materials if you want materials from us for the building of the site. Like I'd be happy to make an FTP folder and give you all the stuff that you need from us. And also we have domains. We have other domains.
That we just own that we're not using.
We have the snakebro.com domain.
Yeah, skirptar.com. You could make an awesome skirptar.com website and just trash everything we say on the podcast and troll the trolls. That would be fantastic.
But can we, because we are using brothersoftheserpent.com for the website. So that would have to stay that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can't have two. Yeah.
Right. Well, if he makes something that's like super amazing, we could just switch the brothersoftheserpent.com over to him, and he can integrate the site that I maintain into that website. So it's just a part of it. And then I can basically unlink the domain from my site, and it would be on his, but our site would be embedded.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, you know, who knows how it would happen, but I'm just saying value for value means you guys, that the listeners provide the work if they want to. So I'm just saying I got this. I just reacted to this all wrong. And the Snake Force was right to tell me that I completely screwed up the value for value model on this. So I'm telling you,
We don't know what we're doing.
Yeah,
folks,
I have no idea what I'm doing. So what I'm telling you is I'm sorry, and I think you're what's the word I'm looking for? I completely lost it.
Like the business deal idea?
Well, yeah, just his proposal.
Yeah, your
your
proposal.
proposal's fantastic. I'll work with you on it, man. Let's see what we can come up with. So yeah, just wanted to go back over that. Okay, let's see what else we got here.
You did it, Betty.
What?
Well, last time I was like, it's not going to work. Don't worry about it. Now I'm like, whoa.
Oh, you're telling him?
Yeah. You did it.
Okay, we did do the thing with the bonsai trees, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Not that one.
Well, I got this box from History Shift. I bet I know what it is.
You can probably start opening it. Yeah.
This better be my crystals. This is a one-up box. Perfect cube.
Yeah.
I already know who it's from. And let's see. Much easier bubble wrap job.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Way easier bubble wrap job.
Oh, wow. Yeah, smoky quartz. Look at that.
That is beautiful.
From History Shift. Snacks! Kyle, first, happy birthday. Here is a self-day piece of smoky quartz. This is due to the high level of iron in the quartz. Your friend, History Shift. Enjoy. Snakes! Thank you, buddy.
Yeah. All right, this is from
Did I read that right? A self-day?
Is it a self-day?
Self-day.
Yeah, here's a self-day.
Self-day. It's really beautiful, man. Wow. Where did you find this?
Self-dug.
Self-dug.
I think that's Doug.
Gotcha. See? Can't read.
Something like that. Yeah, well, History Shift needs to learn how to write.
Man, this is awesome. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Okay, this is from James. Email from James. He says, it's called Uncle Skipper's Snake Bro Input. He says, Eric P. Dollard has done many Tesla-type experiments. He also says the sun is electric after studying it for some college in Arizona. He has had equipment stolen and destroyed several times. Some say he is crazy, and he may be. His health is declining. Anyway, I think you guys would be interested in some of his theories and experiments. Also, Theoria Apophysis has some great stuff on light, electromagnetism, and gravity fields, and the ether. He's quite the jerk, but I just looked past that. Your podcasts are amazing. What a great way to exchange ideas with people who know the standard model is retarded. I've decided no one can ever earn a certificate of ignorance because you never graduate. Keep diving. Serpentologists rock.
That's right.
He does know. No one ever graduates. Oh, and then he gave me a correction. The correction is Theoria, and I still can't say it, apophasis. Dang, spell correct. He has a bunch of stuff on cameras that I never watch, is what he says. Okay, this is from Chris. He says, just wanted to thank you for your awesome podcast and content. I'm going through all the shows for a second and sometimes third time. Mind-blowing.
Wow.
I really hope you guys can make it to Egypt soon. I was fortunate to be able to go last year on a tour. It was insane. I have been a fan of Randall Carlson, Dr. Shock, and Graham Hancock for years, but hearing about Egypt and actually going there was overwhelming. When you guys go, with all of your knowledge, I'm sure you'll see things that will give you even more, quote unquote, these eyes. I took tons of pictures and would be happy to share any if you guys would like them. I just pointed and clicked at as many things as possible. Thanks again, Chris. P.S. I hope you publish your music soon. Snacks! Dude, we would love the
Thanks,
pictures.
man.
You can email them, or if you hop in the Discord, I'm sure that the Snake Force would also love to see your pics. There's actually a pics channel in there, and you can hop in there and just spam it with tons of Egypt pics. They would love that.
Please do, yeah. I hope the music is published soon, too.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, are you talking about the podcast music? Yeah, same.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter.
all the music,
All of
right?
it.
Yeah. Some people have asked me on the Discord, like, so have those middle pieces of music been published yet? Because I called them like they're just middle parts of music, of songs. All those middle parts of songs. Have you guys published those yet? All right, this is from Gavin, who I mentioned at the end of the last show. It's called Snakes! ! 1.
Classic.
Yeah, Snake Bros. I'm not sure where to begin. I have crammed 3 years of episodes into about 3 weeks. I'm a welder, so I have nearly all day to listen. I feel it helps make my welds a bit more structurally sound. That's cool.
Heck yeah, buddy.
Your show is effing fantastic. It's exactly what I've been looking for after wading through all conspiracy shows and alternative history, etc., to find pieces of the things you guys talk about on every episode. The lack of political stuff is refreshing. I feel like I can breathe as opposed to clinch while listening to something like Tinfoil Hat, for example. Well, we like Tinfoil Hat. He says, my brain size has definitely expanded at least 33.3% since working through the catalog. I have a couple of quick synchronicities if you're into that kind of stuff. One, as I said, I am a welder. After building a storm shelter or safe room, I have to hang this giant metal door. I was listening to the Coral Castle episode, kind of zoning out, listening as one tends to do while listening and working as I started hanging this door, and one of you said, if you've ever hung a door, you know how difficult it is. And I was like, yes, I do know. 2, this one's more out there. I have a memory from when I was very young. Feels like I hadn't been walking very long and couldn't talk yet. Behind my granny's house in southeastern Oklahoma, she had a shed. I've only ever known it as the quote-unquote snake house. I do not know if it was being called that at the time of this story, but it's also weird. I remember walking towards the shed to a gravel pile right in front of it. As I came around the side of the gravel pile, on the other side stood a big snake. I said stood because it was standing like you imagine a cobra standing. It was taller than I was. I just remember looking at it for a bit, it looking back at me, and then I walked off. I remember it being what I can only describe as a cartoony green color with black and yellow and orange markings. Needless to say, no snakes in this area fit that description. I've always just thought it was this weird pre-memory I always had, until I started coming across the Sumerian stuff, and I was like, "Yep, that's what that snake memory is." So, Snake Brother in Oklahoma for sure. That is a weird.
That is really weird.
That's a strange
standing snake.
Standing snake.
At first, I was thinking it was a puff adder or a hognose.
Yeah,
but that doesn't match the color.
Right.
But they do stand up like cobras.
Yeah, they do.
And they can flare their necks out like cobras.
Yeah.
Defense mechanism and stuff.
They're posers. Cobra posers.
Yeah, they play dead. They're really cool. They're really cool snakes.
He says, which, by the way, the area my granny lived in, southeastern Oklahoma, has a lot of arrowheads. My uncle has tons that he's found before they made the area into a big lake.
Oh.
I'll be making some trips down there this spring and summer to see what I can find. I think I might remember some mounds as well. Also, I lived in Bastrop, Texas for a bit a few years ago, and I feel like it's probably fairly close to the 10 by 10 by 10 by maybe? Anyway, I found a few scrapers and something I can't quite identify, but it's pretty clear it's been worked on. I may track the pics down and send it to see what you guys think. Seriously, your show is fantastic. It is a breath of fresh air. Gavin. P.S. I always picture the watcher wearing a mask.
Well, he might be. We can't see the watcher.
Right. And he sent a PS in a second email. He said, I forgot this. Ea be praised. Seriously, that part of the Gilgamesh episode, I literally LOL'd. Thanks, Gavin. What a fantastic email.
Yeah, so I sent her. I did see the pictures. I sent a response to the first picture, which looked like a preform or maybe a scraper, because there may have been some finer work around the edge. I just couldn't see from the picture. But the second set of pictures looked like a piece of granite or some non-flint like rock. Maybe it was flint, but it was very smooth, like it was worn in a river or something. And it did have a divot in it that he was thinking, it fits in your hand perfectly.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so what I've been told about that kind of stuff, and I'm not sure what to think about it, is, you find this rock and it's like doesn't have the typical work signs of like flint wood, where you can see this sort of chipped glass look. But it's smoothly worn and your hand fits right into it. Those could have been made. It's really hard to say because you don't see the work marks. Like Christopher Dunn talks about, where are the tool marks?
Yeah.
So the tool marks are not there. Maybe the rock's been tumbled in a river since it was used as a tool. So that obscures the tool marks. The other thing is that they used what worked. So if you're walking along and you pick up a rock that perfectly fits to your hand and it happened naturally, it doesn't mean that it's not a tool. It could have been a tool because somebody may have used it just as it was.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
They used, you find a stick in the woods that's perfectly straight, already broken, already smoothed off or whatever. Well, that's a tool. You just start using it as one.
Right. And the probability that it was a tool goes up the closer you are to a known campsite.
Yes. So if you're finding arrowheads and you're finding other worked tools, and then you find this rock that you can't really see the work on it, but it fits perfectly in your hand, it looks like, man, this could have been used for
something.
Yeah. It's very likely it was a tool.
Right. So the pictures are really great, Gavin. Thanks a lot. And I'm so glad you're a listener. Thanks for the great email. Hope you keep listening.
Yeah.
So welders are cool and crazy. We know some welders.
Yeah, and I'm not sure.
All you guys are nuts.
I'm not sure where Bastrop is, but everywhere in Texas is far from everywhere else in Texas.
Yeah.
But we're still neighbors.
That's true. That's right. Everywhere in Texas, it's all 8 hours away from everything else. All right, this is from Curtis. He says, Curtis here again. Sorry to be a pronunciation Nazi, but Hebrides is Hebrides. Hebrides is an island chain, an archipelago comprising hundreds of islands off the northwest coast of Scotland. So I probably read it in the last.
Yeah.
And I said Hebrides because that's what it looks like. Hebrides. Hebrides. No, Hebrides. He says, by the way, the German term Hochwasserkatastrophen means floodwater disaster or high water catastrophe. And yeah, I could tell that. That's the great thing about German. Is you can kind of tell what the word means, even though it's not in English. You can still get, okay, I see that, it's big water catastrophe. Also, by the way, Gavin, the watcher says the Plains garden snake has that color. Garter snake has that coloring, is in the region, and has sometimes been reported to stand. So possible, maybe look that one up. Plains garter snake. Oh, and he also says that History Shift is too busy finding dolmens to learn how to write. So Curtis also says, this all makes sense. I love your show. Keep going, Snake Brothers. Curtis. Thanks, Curtis.
Thanks, buddy.
And you're not a Nazi. I very much appreciate the corrections. I want to be able to say these places' names right and say the words right. So I don't have a problem with it. Homo correctus. At work again.
It's a tough job. Okay, it's 2 hours and 21 minutes.
Lake Bastrop. Okay. All right, I know we're getting up on time here, but let's finish these emails. Kevin says, geographic tidbits here. Snake Bros. I was enjoying a second go-around on your latest podcast about Earth and upheaval. At some point during the discussion about recent volcanoes, you talked about the Deccan traps and other interesting lava flows. There is just such a formation not far from you guys in New Mexico. Check out the Carrizozo Malpais, I don't know how to say it, just north of the White Sands Missile Range. I stumbled across this unusual lava flow during a recent cross-country road trip. One thing that stood out to me right away was this distinct lack of a volcano or crater anywhere in sight. On a separate note, I recently visited the Dry Falls State Park in Washington State. You guys are in for a treat during CAC 2020. I could hear Randall's voice in my head as I drove into the canyon, in awe of the geology I have been hearing about for years. I hope to be a participant. Keep up the excellent work. Snacks! Kevin. Low-level Patreon.
Hey, thank you so much, buddy.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate that. And there's actually a whole lot more emails, so we're gonna have to save some for the next show because we got a ton more. So we're already way up on time.
Man.
I mean, I've got like fucking 12 more. You know?
Well, you just ruined this episode for going on the radio.
What? We just can't do them all. It's not even possible.
Yeah, it's not going on the radio. That's all I'm saying.
What?
All right, folks. We'll be back after. We'll be back.
Fuck me.
Snakes. Amidst a giant explosion taking place very slowly, Snake Bros podcast in the 10x10 tangent cube, opening up some one-up boxes here.
I think this one is from Commander Frank.
Are you sure?
Yes. I am almost 100% positive. Yes, it is. He said he sent us 3 of these.
Oh.
One for you, one for me, and one for the cube. These
Power
are
bank.
solar
Holy crap.
recharging power packs. Power battery packs.
Oh my gosh.
He was like, I just
These
went
are
ahead and got 3 just in case.
Wow, man, these are really awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Frank. Dude, these are great. Survival, it's a Patriot Brothers Survival Power Bank. Comes from Frank. Our fearless commander.
Thanks, buddy.
Dude, these are sweet.
They are.
Yeah.
All right. Never stop listening to podcasts ever again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. These are really awesome.
Yeah, thank you. All right, one more one-up box. This one is from Anne. Man, this one's serious tape job here.
Don't cut yourself open.
Yeah, I know. I'm worried.
Yeah. This is the one. The book she looked all over the place for, and then found right
in
next to
front
the
of her.
desk.
Yeah. She had this comment where she was going to trash me on losing my bookmarks.
Oh my God! Let me do it.
Kyle's terrified of the way I use a knife. Here we go. She was gonna suggest that she was like, I was gonna say that real books are far superior for saving bookmarks, but then I remembered that I usually can't even find the actual book. That's what she said.
This is true. We try to open these one-up boxes very quickly on the podcast.
Oh, 2 books.
2 books.
Just taking a wild guess that Laura might enjoy this one.
Oh.
Cool. Quilts and cuisine.
Province
Cuisine.
Quilts and Cuisine. Cool. Dude.
And this one she sent for us. Berkeley Rocks, Building with Nature. Man, look at that house built into that giant boulder.
Oh, wow.
Really cool. Thank you. Too massive to move and too striking to ignore, scores of huge volcanic and metamorphic boulders dot the hills of Berkeley, California, and surrounding towns. Some of the biggest rocks are on public land and are familiar local destinations for rock climbers and picnickers. Other rocks sequestered on private land beguile only those lucky enough to be in the know. Berkeley Rocks reveals many of these hidden rocks for the first time, showing how they have been incorporated into home and landscape design by visionary architects and developers. Really cool.
I'm not wanting to remove this little wrapper on the book for Laura, but I am looking at the back of it, and she's going to love this book.
Look, she's got marks in here. Though she's showing us the superiority of actual bookmarks. Bookmark, see bottom left page. Very first page. For smallest snake, turn this over. Smiley faces.
Hey.
This is for
stickers
Soul.
for Soul.
Yeah. Man.
Wow, thank you so much.
What a fantastic one-up box.
The whole
Bookmark one. See
presents
bottom
for the whole snake pit.
She's trolling me with
I
the
love
one-up
it.
box. It's fantastic.
It's genius.
Thank you guys so much, Frank and Ann and History Shift, everybody who sends one-up boxes. We thank you so much. If you want to send us one-up boxes, send us free stuff for the Tangent Cube. We would love that. We do have a P.O. box. You can get it from the Discord chat, or you can send me an email, and I'll let you know what it is. So thank you guys so much. Okay. So back to Velikovsky, Earth in Upheaval. We are now, so the last thing I read was about, well, you guys know. I don't have to tell you. You probably just listened to it. So now we're going to the ruins of the East. It says, in the ruins of excavated sites throughout all lands of the ancient East, signs are seen of great destruction that only nature could have inflicted. Claude Schaeffer, in his great recent work, discerned 6 separate upheavals. All of these catastrophes of earthquake and fire were of such encompassing extent that Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, the Iranian Plateau, Syria, Palestine, Cyprus, and Egypt were simultaneously overwhelmed. And some of these catastrophes were, in addition, of such violence that they closed great ages in the history of ancient civilizations. The most ancient catastrophe of which Schaeffer discerned remnants took place between 2400 and 2300 before the present era. It spread ruin from Troy to the valley of the Nile. In it, the old Bronze Age found its end. Laid waste were cities of Anatolia, like Al-Kahuyuk, Tarsus, Alisar, and those of Syria, like Ugarit, Byblos, Shagar Bazar, Tel Brak, Tepe Garwa, and of Palestine, like Beth Shan and Ai, and of Persia, and of the Caucasus. Destroyed were the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Cyprus, and the old kingdom in Egypt came to an end, a great and splendid age. In all cities, walls were thrown from their foundations, and the population markedly decreased. It was an all-encompassing catastrophe. In a few centuries, migrating and multiplying themselves, the descendants of the survivors of the ruined world built new civilizations. The Middle Bronze Age. In Egypt, it was the time of the Middle Kingdom, a short but glorious resurrection of Egyptian civilization and might. Literature reached its perfection, political might its apogee. Then came a shock that in a single day made of this empire a ruin of its art, debris, and of its population, corpses. Again, it was the entire ancient East to its uttermost frontiers that fell prostrate. Nature, which knows no boundaries, threw all countries into a tremor and covered the land with ashes. Quote, this brilliant period of the Middle Bronze Age, during which flourished the art of the Middle Kingdom in Egypt and the exquisite art and industry of the Middle Minoan Age on Crete, and in the course of which great centers of trade like Ugarit and Syria enjoyed remarkable prosperity, was suddenly terminated. The great activity of international trade, which during the Middle Bronze Age had been characteristic of the Eastern Mediterranean and most of the lands of the Fertile Crescent, suddenly stopped in all of this vast area. In all the sites in Western Asia, examined up to now, a hiatus or a period of extreme poverty broke the stratigraphic and chronological sequence of the strata. In most countries, the population suffered great reduction in numbers. In others, settled living was replaced by a nomadic existence, unquote. In Asia Minor, the end of the Middle Bronze came suddenly, and a rupture between that age and the Late Bronze is evident in, quote, all sites that were stratigraphically examined, unquote. Troy, Baghazakoi, Tarsus, Alisar present the same picture of life vanishing with the end of the Middle Bronze. In Tarsus, between the strata of the, quote, brilliantly developed civilization, unquote, of the Middle Bronze and those of the Late Bronze, a layer of earth 5 feet thick was found without a sign of habitation, a hiatus, or as Randall was calling it, a culturally sterile.
Yeah.
At Al-Kahuyuk, the transition from Middle Bronze to Late Bronze was marked by an upheaval and destruction, and the same may be said of every excavated site in Asia Minor.
Wow.
That's crazy. It appears also that the end of the Middle Kingdom was marked by volcanic eruptions and lava flows. On the Sinai Peninsula, at an early and undisclosed date, a flow of basaltic lava from the fissured ground, the Sinai Massif is not a volcano, burned down forests, leaving a desert behind. In Palestine, lava erupted, filling the Jezreel Valley. Early in this century, a Phoenician vase was found embedded in lava. Wow. Geologists have asserted that volcanic activity in Palestine ceased in prehistoric times. Quote, the assertion of the geologists thus becomes very questionable, unquote, wrote an author at that time. The vase found in lava proves volcanic activity there in historical times. So I guess the geologists were saying that that lava flow is very much older than the human civilization, and then they found a Phoenician vase stuck in it.
That's crazy.
The verdict of the archaeologists is that the vase dates from the 15th century before the present era, and thus the eruption must have taken place in the middle of the second millennium. Either that or the Phoenician vases are much older than the archaeologists are saying.
Right.
So, but Velikovsky is constantly in this throughout the book here pushing for younger dates of stuff. Whereas I see the stuff he points out and I'm like, okay, but it could also mean that that civilization is much older.
He's talking about younger dates for catastrophe.
Yes.
We're talking about older dates for archaeology.
Civilization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's saying like, here's evidence because we've got this vase stuck in this lava that this lava may be much younger. And I'm like, or the civilization's much older. You know, it's one of those, right? But his point is to try to, because what he was saying in Worlds in Collision was that there were these enormous catastrophes that happened because of these moving planets.
Yeah.
And these were in fairly recent times, 2000 BC, 4000 BC, whatever. So he's constantly sort of pushing you in that direction, but I see a lot of this stuff as being, it could go either way. Maybe the Phoenician vases are copies of something of a much older civilization, like this one stuck in the lava here.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
I mean, it's not true. It could be true.
Could be true.
Did you lose all your bookmarks again?
No.
Okay.
I was a little bit freaked out there for a minute, though. No, I was just trying to, get on through the book here. Okay. Collapsing schemes. In 1829, Gerard Deschamps published his studies on the fossiliferous strata in the Paris area, where marine animals alternate with land animals. These strata disclosed that in the upper marine bed many kinds of shell-bearing mollusks that still inhabit the waters of the sea, and that the deeper of the stratum, the fewer the living forms of these mollusks. Following the publication of Deschamps' work, Lyell, I guess we're talking about Charles Lyell again, Lyell devised a timetable of geological ages. The fossilized remains of ancient animals indicate changes in fauna in the course of time. Lyell's measurement of geological periods is based on such changes in the animal kingdom, especially among the shell fauna. So remember, we've talked about this, that at least initially these geological time spans and time periods were based on how long they thought it took these animals to develop based on evolutionary processes.
Right. And that gave them a way to count the strata. Right.
Yes.
Or to count time based on the strata.
Right. He found that there has been in the Quaternary, or the age of man, not more than 1/20th of the evolution that has occurred since the lower Miocene, which is the middle series of Tertiary, the age of mammals. And by the way, some of these names of these geological ages have changed since Velikovsky wrote the book. I don't know if they use Miocene anymore. Maybe they do. But from that point on, he traced one complete, quote, cycle of evolution, unquote, during which, at his estimate, practically all species that existed at the opening of the cycle were replaced by new species. Thus, if a figure of 1 million years is accepted for the age of man, which started with the close of the Tertiary epoch, then 20 million years were needed to accomplish the changes observed since the lower Miocene, and 4 such cycles of transformation of life forms must have passed since the end of the Mesozoic, or the age of reptiles. By this method, Lyell reckoned 12 cycles, or 240 million years, from the beginning of the Paleozoic, or the time of early life forms on the Earth. This figure is now considerably increased. The other figures are accepted at Lyell's valuation. Lyell's time system is based on the assumption that no catastrophic events intervened and that the extirpation of species was the result of slow extinction, which Darwin's theory ascribes to the survival of the fittest in the struggle for the limited means of existence. But if great catastrophes occurred on the Earth, on the surface of the Earth, and in the depths of the seas of more than local character, and if in such upheavals some forms of life perished and others survived, and the progeny of still others underwent strong mutations, then the entire scheme of percentages and time allotment by the multiplication of changes observed in the last epoch, with its preconceived plan and rigidity, is no more valid than the pronouncements of some theologians, like Archbishop Usher of Ireland, who in 1654 declared that the creation took place at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 26th day of October in the year of our Lord 4004 BC. That's really specific. 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
That's when creation took place.
So the Watcher says the Miocene is the first geological epoch of the Neogene period, and it extends from about 23.03 to 5.33333 million years ago.
Okay. Miocene was named by Charles Lyell. Comes from the Greek words that I can't read, and it means less recent because it has 18% fewer modern sea invertebrates than the Pliocene. Okay. Cool.
Still exists in the geological dating model.
Yeah, but I do know that some of these terms that he uses aren't used as much anymore, even though people still know what they are.
Well, they're not in this book.
Miocene is not in there? It'd be right. It'd be pretty recent, 5 million years.
No.
Okay. So what he's saying here, like this whole section.
I mean, it's not in the chart.
Oh, okay.
It could be in the dictionary itself, but.
So what he's saying is, like, Lyell put together this whole chart, like what you were looking at there. He put this together by taking Darwin's idea of how species progress, right? And then looking at the layers and finding what fossils were in what layers, and then calculating how much time it would take by saying, okay, here's what we got in this layer. How many of the same species or not same species are in the next layer above? So let's say that in the next layer above, there's only 20% of the species that were in the layer below. So he assumes that 80% of the species had to have evolved into completely new ones in the next layer. And so he does this giant calculation. Okay, that's how they put together this initial time span.
Right.
And what Velikovsky is saying is that they did this based on the idea that no catastrophes ever occurred that were anything more than of a local nature.
Right.
Right. So he's trying to say that, like, look, if that's not true and there's no reason to think that large catastrophes haven't happened. I mean, how they think the moon was caused by a gigantic catastrophe. We know now that, or at least it's well accepted now, that the dinosaurs were wiped out by a giant catastrophe.
Yeah.
So there have been intervening enormous global catastrophes. And what he's pointing out is that once that part of the plan goes away, then it has no more validity than the bishop saying that the creation happened at,
Yeah, and that's kind of what we've been saying too, is that, like, I mean, we basically have to throw this whole dating model out.
Right.
We don't know. I mean, this is all based on assumptions.
Yeah. It's based on assumptions. That's what I'm saying. And so the time spans have kept increasing as the math and models got better to show how complex life really is. Remember that they were doing this before anybody knew anything about DNA.
Right.
Darwin didn't know about DNA or RNA, right? So once we figured out, okay, wow, even at the smallest level, actually when you get down to the smallest level, the complexity is enormous for life. Even the single-celled life forms have enormous complexity in their DNA strands and RNA strands and all the little things that are happening in the cell. So the idea of, like, random mutation, changing that stuff and it being positive and then that being, causing survival of the fittest or whatever over a long period of time, you have to have more and more and more time as you realize that the model is much more complex than you thought.
The other thing that's interesting about the uniformitarian model, this idea, the rule, right, that if we can't observe it happening today, quote unquote today, in the last 200 years or whatever it is,
modern processes or whatever they say,
then it doesn't exist. But evolution is cool,
right?
Because, like, for hundreds of years we've been observing these same life forms not changing.
Yeah. Yep. Or making tiny small adaptations that aren't
not actually changing their DNA or changing.
Yeah. They're not growing new parts.
Yeah.
They might change, like the fly, the little green bottle fly will have little blue pieces if you mess with it enough. Like, they've done that where they've shown, like, because they could get the bottle fly to, it replicates quickly. It has a fast cycle. So they, like, radiate it with stuff and then, like, look, it turned kind of blue, after 150 generations or whatever. But I don't know. I see adaptations taking place. Like, there's you can actually see I can't remember where I saw this, so no one quote me on this, but I also remember Micah Hanks from the Graylian Report talking about it, that there was a depiction of shark teeth fossils from the Megalodon, right? And the oldest one, now, of course, this is a guess. They're saying here are the oldest ones, and then they have this progression going up to more recent. And you can see that as time went on, the teeth became more and more serrated.
Right.
That's really cool. But that shark did not become a plesiosaur or a crocodile. He just got serrated teeth. Mm-hmm. So is that evolution? Can you take that, the shark, if they're even right about the dating of the teeth, and say that because a shark over a long period of time can end up having serrated teeth, that means that the shark could eventually have legs or whatever? You know, the process, like, can you extrapolate the process into speciation as opposed to adaptation?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you can see traits like that in all kinds of animals. Like,
Yeah.
you know, with dogs, you want floppy ears or whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we were talking about this before. This
With
is
the foxes?
Yeah, this is already stuff that's in their genes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just recessive. You can breed these trends or these not trends,
Traits.
in, you know, they're already there.
Yeah.
But you can pick these traits among the gene pool and end up with, you know, a breed that's very pronounced.
Yeah.
That isn't, and I'm not saying that's not evolution, because in a way, I mean,
Still a dog, though.
just the definition of the word, that you would evolve and adapt to your environment. Mm-hmm. But those traits are already there in the genes, or in the DNA as well.
Right. And the dogs are all still dogs because they can all breed with each other. So they're not even changing species.
Right. So my point is just that we haven't observed that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But
that's right.
But that's okay for evolution. But it's not okay for geology.
I got your point. Your initial point was great. Like, for geology, we have to use only modern processes that are observed, but for evolution, we have to make up all the processes that we don't see.
That we never have seen in the records
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. Watcher, you want to come on and give a short explanation of what you just said about the fruit flies? Can you do that? Because I don't know what you're talking about, but that's pretty cool. Or is it too loud where you are?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
So the father of modern genetics he was a monk, Gregor Mendel. And
fancy
what
that.
he did was he was right. He was he was working with, I want to say it was peas that had different coloring flowers before they formed the actual, peas. They had red, white, and I believe a pink. And what he was doing is he noticed that if you had the red near the white, and at like certain generations, you would have a higher frequency of pink flowers. And if you separate them this way, you get this, you do this, you get this. And what he discovered was that what he was dealing with was recessive traits.
Right.
And co-dominant traits. So that if you have a dominant red and a dominant white, you get a pink.
Okay.
If you have a dominant red and a recessive white, you get red. And so he was working through, and he documented all of this monk style, where he's just got volumes and volumes and volumes of his notes. And from that, later they were able to determine that there are actual genetic traits that are passed from parent to child. And some of them are dominant, some of them are recessive. And in genetics lab, we take fruit flies, and the main thing we're dealing with is red and white eye color.
Okay, that's what it was. That's what I was trying to remember. It was something like that. I knew it was flies.
Right,
yeah.
and then there's also wing size, and then the body color.
Right, yeah.
And based upon what you mix together over like the semester, by the end, you should, if you do it right, exhibit the correct ratios of in your outcome.
Okay.
So yeah, it was cool.
So that's what you meant by phenotypic ratios. You were saying, like, if you're doing it right, you have the right phenotypic ratios of the phenotypes you were aiming for from the start.
Exactly, with the phenotype being the expressed genetic trait, the genotype being the actual dominant recessive, what's there.
Okay, so that whole experiment doesn't demonstrate like new stuff. You're just pulling out things that are already there or not. Is that the idea?
Right,
okay.
Right. You can manipulate the prevalence of a trait. You cannot make the fly have like bat wings. It doesn't work that way.
Right. So I'm not way off in saying that we've never observed evolution in terms of the definition that Darwin set out to show.
No, you're absolutely
I
correct.
mean, because obviously we adapt, and obviously, but how far does that adaptation go? Like, this is what the question is.
And I've done it before with you guys. Don't get me started on the way that evolution doesn't work backwards.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't work backwards. I totally agree.
I don't mind being wrong 99% of the time, but I don't want to be wrong 100% of the time.
Yeah. No, I don't. I think you said it right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you did. You totally did. Darwin didn't mind being 100% wrong. So.
And I think that what was and Lyle. But I think what Darwin, what he was mostly doing, if I've got it right, is he was trying to say, well, could survival of the fittest result in evolution of species? Right.
And what he observed, like the famous story of him on the HMS Beagle, and he's out there in the Galapagos and he's looking at these tree finches and he's like, the ones on this island, they've got the longer beaks and there's more of them. Well, you can have a genetic trait that is better suited to whatever situation at that time.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's say for whatever reason the sky was only 5 feet off the ground. Everybody would be shorter. These tall people would be in their heads all the time.
Yeah.
And so you would have a population of shorter people. That's not evolution. That's selective breeding, essentially. It's natural selection.
Or natural selection, survival of the fittest, quote unquote.
And he did observe that with the tree finches, the ones with the longer, stronger beaks were able to break apart, more nuts or harder things to eat. And so there were more of them.
Yeah.
And perhaps, if you looked at the plant life, there could have been a time in the past when the harder beaks weren't required.
Right.
And so
on other islands in the Galapagos, you had the same type of tree finch differently suited to what was going on that island.
Right. With shorter beaks or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And so from that, he drew the conclusion that there was a change, an evolutionary change.
Yeah. Like in Oklahoma, snakes need to stand up.
To scare little kids.
Exactly. Yes.
This is a known thing.
You guys in Oklahoma roll your snakes all wrong.
All right, thanks, Watcher. That makes that clearer. And I think that
you got it. Evolutionary theory is basically taken from an observation of natural selection.
Yeah.
Which wasn't exact.
Which is situational and local in a lot of times, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They knew at the time it wasn't like a completely ridiculous thing to theorize.
Yeah.
It is now. Right. I'm just saying.
That's just like your opinion, man. All right, so I think we parsed that pretty well, because I think that was an important part to, like, Velikovsky says it in a really flowery way, but he is basically saying that this just doesn't work. Okay, so he says the present work does not suggest either a lengthening or shortening of the estimated age of the Earth or the universe, which during the few years when this book was being written, rose from 2 to 6 billion years.
Yeah.
Now it's, 14-ish, 13 and a half?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But then there's, anyways, go ahead.
Many worlds, infinite universe. I do not see why, to a truly religious mind, a small and short-lived universe is a better proof of its having been devised by an absolute intelligence. Neither do I see how, by removing many unsolved problems in geology to very remote ages, we contribute to their solution or elucidate their enigmatic nature.
Great point. I love it. That's really good.
I love both of those. Like, why? Yeah. Yeah, it was well said. Okay. Where are we at now? Coal. Coal is found in layers that are ascribed to various ages, mainly on the basis of the fossils found in them. Brown coal is a compacted mass of plant remains. Lignite is made chiefly out of trees, only partially converted into coal. Soft or bituminous coal is brittle and of bright luster and contains sulfur. Its organic nature can sometimes be seen under a lens, and the plants that participated in its formation can be recognized by leaves in the shales on top of the coal bed.
That's cool.
Anthracite, or hard coal, is metamorphosed bituminous coal. The origin of the coal beds is still far from being satisfactorily explained. One theory would make peat bogs the place where, in a slow process measured by tens and hundreds of thousands of years, coal was born. It is said that the plants fall, but before they decompose in the air, they are covered by the water of the swamps. A layer of sand is deposited over them, forming the soil for new plants, and thus the process repeats itself. In order that the layer of sand may be deposited, it is necessary that these marshy regions be covered by water in motion. Since almost regularly marine shells and fossils are found on top of coal beds, the sea must have covered the swamps at one time. Then, for new land plants to grow there, the sea must have retreated. There are places where 60, 80, and 100 and more successive beds of coal have formed. This theory would then require that as many times the sea trespassed when the land slowly subsided, and as many times retreated. In other words, this theory assumes that the ground is pulsating, and that the sea will return again sometime and cover the coal beds as it did 100 times in the past.
That's cool.
Quote, fossils of marine clams, snails are abundant in the shales just above each seam of coal. Later, with fluctuating sea level, the salt waters withdrew and another freshwater marsh came into being, giving rise to another bed of coal above the earlier one. Again, we are surprised this time by the large number of such alterations of coal with marine sediments. These are now recognized as distinct cycles, each cycle representing a common sequence of events. Ohio displays more than 40 such cycles, and in Wales more than 100 separate seams of coal have been discovered. Marvin Miller has given 400,000 years as the probable time represented by the average Ohio cycle, unquote. Many kinds of plants and trees that went into the formation of coal do not grow in swamps. That's a big point right there. Because, I mean, if your coal is, if the peat, whatever, is forming in the swamp, well, if a lot of the plants and trees that they're finding in the coal don't grow in swamps, then what's going on?
Yeah.
And when they die, they remain on dry ground and decompose. This fact suffices to render the peat bog theory untenable. Seams of coal are sometimes 50 or more feet thick. No forest could make such a layer. It is estimated that it would take a 12-foot layer of peat deposit to make a layer of coal 1 foot thick. And 12 feet of peat deposit would require plant remains 120 feet high. How tall and thick must a forest be, then, in order to create a seam of coal not 1 foot thick, but 50? The plant remains must be 6,000 feet thick. In some places, there must have been 50 to 100 successive huge forests, one replacing the other, since so many seams of coal are formed. But it is further questionable whether the forest grew one on top of the other, because a coal bed, undivided on one side, sometimes splits on the other side into numerous beds with layers of limestone or other formations in between. Erratic boulders, too, are often encased in coal.
What?
It was supposed that these boulders were carried by chance on natural rafts of closely drifting logs that thus became embedded in the coal. Close rafts of drifting trunks are conceivable only after a great hurricane. However, marine fish would not enter deeply into inundating rivers to be entombed together with the boulders, and coral does not grow in muddy water. And he's saying that because as carbonaceous and bituminous shales are frequently packed with fossilized marine fish, and all the deep sea crinoids and clear water ocean corals alternate with the coal beds.
That's crazy. I mean, even with the catastrophic model, that's still like, how do you get a coal bed 50 feet thick? Like,
Yeah.
what is happening?
You have to pick up the whole forest, roll it all up, set it on fire, and then bury it.
Yeah.
As to the reptilian, avian, and mammalian fauna, the coal is a veritable graveyard. Apes, crocodiles, marsupials, which are pouch animals, left their remains in coal. An Indo-Australian bird, an American condor, tropical giant snakes, East Asian salamanders left their remains there too. Some of the animals are of the steppe habitat. Others, like crocodiles, came from swamps. All found in coal deposits.
Like all together in
Yeah.
the same...
Not only do the origin and the habitats of plants and animals offer a very paradoxical picture, but so also does their state of preservation. chlorophyll is preserved in the leaves found in the brown coal. The leaves must have been rather quickly excluded from contact with air and light, rapidly entombed. These were neither leaves falling off the plants in the fall nor leaves exposed to the action of light and atmosphere after being torn off by a storm. Entire strata of leaves from all parts of the world, counted by the billions, though torn to shreds with but their fine fibers intact, in many cases are still green and are found in the Geisitol lignite coal.
What? That's crazy.
Yeah, coal is really strange stuff.
It's break time.
Let's take a break. Set it all on fire. That's how you do it. Questioning everything and getting almost all of the answers wrong here at the Snake Bros Institute for Advanced Coprolite Studies, where there are no degrees, only certificates of ignorance that you have to make yourself.
That's right.
We don't give them out. You can make your own. We should have a contest. Who has the best certificate of ignorance they made? They can post them in the Discord. We can all vote. All right. More with the coal here from Velikovsky's excellent Earth in Upheaval. So he says, it is not different with the animals. If exposed after death for any length of time to natural conditions, the structure of animal tissues loses its fineness. The muscle and epidermis of the animals of the brown coal of Geisitol, I don't know how to say this, Geisitol, were found to have retained their fine structure. Also, the colors of the insects are preserved in their original splendor.
Man.
The very process of fossilization with silica invading the tissues must have occurred fast, almost instantaneously, in Nilsson's opinion. While the membranes and the colors of the insects are preserved so well, it is difficult to find a complete... While the membranes and the colors of the insects are preserved so well, it is difficult to find a complete insect. Mostly only torn parts are found.
I was going to say, I really want a coal bug. Like, I want one of
Coal
those.
bug. Yeah. But just like the leaves,
Yeah, it's just
even
a
though
tiny
they're
little
preserved
fragment.
so well, the leaves are just, all of the tissue is gone and it's just the fibers.
But they're all broken up, too.
Yeah,
right?
all that broken up. And then the bugs that are in there still have the colors, retained, but they're just little fragments.
Yeah.
Like it's
Just a toe would be cool. Just like a colorful bug toe in a chunk of coal. Maybe History Ship has one. Send me one, buddy.
Yeah. All right. Footprints. In numerous places and in various formations are found footprints of animals of prehistoric times. Those of dinosaurs and other animals are clearly impressed in rock. The accepted explanation is that these animals walked on muddy ground, and their imprints were preserved as the ground became hard and stony. This explanation cannot stand up against critical examination. On muddy ground, one may find impressions of the hooves of cattle or horses, but the very next rain will smudge these impressions, and after a short while they will be there no more. If we do not find the hoof prints of cattle that passed along a path to the season before, how is it that the toe imprints of animals of pre-diluvial times remain intact in the mud upon which they walked?
Great question.
In historical times, in the volcanic destruction of Pompeii, lava and volcanic ashes filled the wheel tracks in the streets of these cities and thus preserved them to our day. See, I've had this fight with people that those quote-unquote cart ruts in Pompeii, those aren't flagstones. That's mud that was turned to stone by all the pyroclastic stuff that came down on top of it. But people point to it as like evidence that flagstones in Roman cities have cart ruts in them. I'm like, no, those aren't flagstones. That was mud. It's just hardened into stone now because of the pyroclastic stuff that got dumped on top of it.
So it's all cracked in like square.
Yeah, it looks
crack
like
patterns?
flagstones, but it's actually desiccation cracks.
That's cool.
Okay, Watcher says Geiseltal possibly is how you say this. Thanks, Watcher. That's probably right, Geiseltal. Okay, so again, in historical times, the volcanic destruction of Pompeii, lava and volcanic ashes filled the wheel tracks in the streets of these cities and thus preserved them to our day. In the eruption of Kilauea in Hawaii in 1790, when many people lost their lives, and with them a brigade of the Hawaiian army, the footprints of trapped humans and animals were retained in the hardened volcanic ash.
Wait a second. Oh, dang it. Never mind. I was going to go off on a tangent. I was just thinking about the, Sacsayhuaman blocks and all that kind of stuff. Like, if we've seen this process of mud being turned to stone using volcanic ash naturally, then maybe they had a way of doing it.
That's possible.
So they weren't making a concrete. They were mining a specific type of mud that had the fossils in it.
Yep.
And they were just forming it and then mixing it with this...
Yeah, volcanic ash makes great concrete. Yeah, that's what the Romans used.
And then, blast it with your massive Shamir flamethrower and
vitrify it a bit.
I don't know. Anyways, keep going.
Okay, so the footprints of trapped humans and animals were retained in the hardened volcanic ash. Wherever footprints in the ground dating from historical or prehistoric times are found, we may assume that most probably a catastrophe took place where these remnants were left, or very shortly thereafter. If a catastrophe was in progress or was threatening, the animals must have been in terror and flight. Now, see, we've noticed this too. We found footprints, and it always looks like they're running, right? The footprints actually show that the animals in most cases were fleeing, not waiting or loitering about. And sometimes the configuration of the impressions indicates that an animal was indecisive, probably trapped by some peril closing in from all sides. Yeah. And you can just imagine.
I just had the whole mental picture of this big bird thing trying to figure out which direction to run.
Right. It
like the chickens do when I go into the coop.
Right. Exactly. And if there's something coming from all sides, they run this way and then they run that way and then they run over here and they run over there. Yeah. And you can see that in the tracks.
It's terrible.
Wherever footprints. The animals that were in flight for their lives may have succumbed a few moments later, crushed or burned in the disaster. The ground was swept by driven sand and ashes or covered by lava or asphalt or cement or fluid silicon, then possibly covered by floods, and the imprints in the heated soil that was baked into stone have survived to the present day. So it is that we do not find tracks of animals that peacefully walked 100 or 300 years ago, but we do find traces and remnants of animals that walked and ran many thousands of years ago. And I mean, I agree with that. We went to, what was that park we went to? Was it Government Canyon? Yeah. And we found there were some tracks in the bottom of a creek bed, dry creek bed. And they were like on this layer, the flat layer. And when you looked, you could look along the creek bed and follow that layer, which was a surface on the ground, all the way up to the cliff face. And the layer immediately above it was like 5 feet thick.
At least, yeah.
So,
and all the footprints are like running out from underneath that cliff.
yeah, exactly.
They were running from this cliff.
All right, caverns. In great natural catastrophes, animals seek cover from terrifying phenomena: floods, falling meteorites, burning forests, and frightening portents in the sky. Caverns are the places of refuge most sought. An instinct in animals impels them to escape into a den or a hole in the ground, and large animals run for caverns. They may remember such places in the hour of catastrophe, and one may follow another. Of course, many animals never reach the shelter of a cave, but some of them do. And when, in the detritus on the floor of a cave, bones are found of animals that we usually would not associate, and the bones are mixed together, and those of the prey animals are not crushed by the teeth of the carnivores, then it is almost certain that these animals tried to save themselves, unafraid of one another in this cave, in the face of approaching catastrophe. It is possible that some of the animals in the shelter survived the catastrophe and then their wild instincts must have returned, but in many cases all of them succumbed, overwhelmed by gases or smoke, eddying currents on the surface of the earth, and tides that buried them under sediment. In numerous places of the world, the bone content of caves indicates that they served as hideouts in times of supreme danger. Lions and tigers, wolves and hyenas, gazelles and hares shared the refuge and there found their common grave. But not all places where such assemblages of bones are discovered were sought for refuge. In many cases, the animals were swept from large areas by a tidal wave and thrown against rocks, and the water rushing through these fissures left behind the animals with all their bones broken within their torn bodies. From as far as China to England and France and the islands of the Mediterranean, examples of fissures and cracks filled with bones splintered and mingled together have been presented in this book. Extinction. Many forms of life, many species and genera of animals that lived on this planet in a recent geological period in the age of man have utterly disappeared without leaving a single survivor. Mammals walked in fields and forests, propagated and multiplied, and then without a sign of degeneration, they vanished. Quote, a considerable group have become extinct virtually within the last few thousand years. The large mammals that died out in America include all the camels, all the horses, all the ground sloths, 2 genera of musk oxen, peccaries, certain antelopes, a giant bison with a horn spread of 6 feet, a giant beaver-like animal, a stag moose, several kinds of cats, some of which were larger than lions, or lion-sized. Also, the imperial elephant and the Columbian mammoth, animals larger than the African elephant and common all over North America, disappeared. The mastodon that inhabited the forests and ranged from Alaska to the Atlantic coast in Mexico, and the woolly mammoth that roamed in a broad area adjacent to the ice sheets likewise persisted up until a few thousand years ago. The dire wolf, the saber-toothed tiger, the short-faced bear, the small horse also disappeared and are no longer found either in the Old or in the New World. Many birds, too, became extinct. These species are believed to have been destroyed, quote-unquote, to the last specimen in the closing of the Ice Age. Animals, strong and vigorous, suddenly died out without leaving a survivor. The end came not in the course of the struggle for existence with the survival of the fittest, fit and unfit, and mostly fit, old and young, sharp teeth and with strong muscles, with fleet legs and plenty of food around, all perished. These facts, as I have already quoted, drive, quote, the biologist to despair as he surveys the extinction of so many species and genera in the closing of the Pleistocene, unquote. In the woolly mammoth, the genus of elephants achieved its evolutionary perfection. As was already shown by Falconer and known to Darwin, the teeth of the mammoth were superior to those of modern elephants, and in many other respects, their adaptation was perfect. The theory of evolution had in the mammoth one of the best examples of a species evolving in the struggle for survival by adaptation. Stone Age man made drawings of it. Possibly he even domesticated some of them. In the Neolithic town of Predmost in Moravia, bones of 800 to 1,000 mammoths were found. Their shoulder blades were used in building tombs. On the vast plains of northern Siberia, they roamed in herds. They succumbed there as if in one cold night that fell over the land, and knew no recess thereafter. They did not die from starvation. Their food was found in their stomachs and also between their teeth. The best preserved body of a mammoth, with even its eyeballs intact, was found in Beresovka in Siberia, 800 miles west of the Bering Strait. Quote, a fractured hip and forelimb, a great mass of clotted blood in the chest, and unswallowed grass between the clenched teeth all point to the violence and suddenness of its passing, unquote.
That's how they did it. They built all those structures with mammoths.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine if you had a team of like they're really smart, you can train them to do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
They got these massive horns, you could, their tusks, you could outfit their tusks for
lifting
all kinds
giant
of stuff.
blocks. Oh yeah, man.
Yeah, running the saws and all that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That would be awesome, yeah.
Yeah. Put the blocks in the river and have the mammoths walk in the river and drag those things or where on the shore, wherever.
Yeah.
Dude, that's what happened.
That would be really cool. I mean, yeah, but we're always told that they had no beasts of burden because that requires.
Yeah, but the Egyptians that we're talking about or that they're talking about are not the ones that built it. This would have been before the end of the last ice age.
Yeah.
So
very ancient.
This is
man.
what you could. Yeah. Done deal, folks. It's mystery solved.
Mammoth power.
Yeah.
That would be really cool. I would love to see an artist depiction of that. Mammoths helping to build giant megalithic structures. In many parts of the Americas, fossil hunters found fossilized bones of horses in great numbers often embedded in rock or in lava, which do not differ in shape from the bones of the present-day horse. Why did the horse become extinct with the end of the Ice Age if the climate became so favorable? What he's pointing out here is that once the Spanish came back and brought horses to the Americas, I mean, they just went crazy. There were huge herds of them running wild all over the place because it was, very favorable to them here.
Yeah, and the Watcher's pointing out Flintstones. Yeah, somebody already came up with the idea.
They were using dinosaurs to build stuff. Yeah, that's right. In earlier ages, there were in America different-looking horses with three-toed feet, also very small horses the size of cats. That would be cool. Cat-sized horses, that would be cute. F. Rainey, now of the University of Pennsylvania, has observed that, quote, in certain regions of Alaska, the bones of these extinct animals lie so thickly scattered that there can be no question of human handiwork involved. Though man was on the scene of the final perishing, his was not then the appetite nor the capacity for such giant slaughter, unquote. And because of the wholesale and rapid extermination of fauna, quote, it seems impossible to attribute the phenomenon to the unaided efforts of man. Even with the known destructiveness of man, however, it is difficult to visualize how these early hunters, armed with puny flint-tipped spears, could have destroyed enough animals to cause complete extinction, unquote.
Yeah. And then of themselves.
Right, and then they all die too. Whoops. But many species were completely extinguished in the old world as well as in the new. Mammoths and mastodons and others. They expired not because of lack of food or inadequate organic evolution, inferior build or lack of adaptation, plentiful food and superb bodies and fine adaptation and solid procreation, but no survival of the fit. They died as if a wind had snuffed life out of all of them, leaving their cadavers with no signs of degeneration in asphalt pits, in bogs, in sediments, and in caverns. All right, chapter 15. Almost done with the book here. Cataclysmic evolution. Catastrophism and evolution. The theory of evolution dates back to the age of classic Greece, one of its proponents having been Anaximander, which I'm probably completely butchering his name. And from some time to time, philosophers have offered the evolutionary explanation of the origin of the multiple forms of life on Earth, as opposed to the theory of special creation or the permanency of living forms from the day of creation. Lamarck thought that the acquired characteristics were transmittable by heredity and thus might lead to the appearance of new forms of life. In 1840, the year that Agassiz's Ice Age theory was published, an anonymously printed work, Remnants of Creation, written by Robert Chambers, caused a stir that did not subside for years. It was bitterly attacked by every British scientist for teaching that human beings are, quote, the children of apes and the breeders of monsters, unquote, in the words of one critic, the president of the Geological Society, Adam Sedgwick. Darwin later acknowledged that the brunt of the attack against his own theory was absorbed by this book. What was new in Darwin's teaching was not the principle of evolution in general, but the explanation of its mechanism by natural selection. This was an adaptation to biology of the Malthusian theory about population growing more quickly than the means of existence. Darwin acknowledged his debt to Malthus, whose book he read in 1838. Herbert Spencer and Alfred R. Wallace independently came to the same views as Darwin, and the expression survival of the fittest was actually Spencer's. So a book was written earlier that basically said that a lot of the same stuff. Darwin was the one that put forward this whole natural selection, but the survival of the fittest was not even his phrase. Interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
Thus it happened that the entire controversy for and against Darwinism failed to respond to the challenge of Darwin, who tried to show that what appeared to be the result of global catastrophes could be explained as the product of slow changes multiplied by time, with no violence intervening. The opposition was concentrated against the idea of evolution and in support of special creation. Insisting that all animals were created in the forms in which they are found in our days, the opponents of evolution waged their battle on geologically indefensible ground. So here's where Velikovsky gets into a little bit more of how the religious problem gets in there, right? He's saying that, like, look, the whole fight against Darwin's ideas were based on the special creation as opposed to like,
Right.
look, what's wrong with catastrophe, right?
Yes.
I think that's what he's saying is like the fight failed because they were battling on geologically indefensible grounds of special creation. So he says, but why did Darwin oppose the idea of great catastrophes in the past? Oh, and I wanted to point out again here, or just real quickly, he says Darwin tried to show that what appeared to be the result of global catastrophes could be explained as the product of slow changes multiplied by time with no violence. Right? So he's like, guys, I know this looks like catastrophe, but it's totally not.
Yeah.
Right? That's basically what he's saying. Like it looks catastrophic in the layering, but let's just say that it's not.
Yeah.
What if it's the really long processes and it just kind of looks this way for whatever reason? So special pleading is what that is, I think. It's it's argument by default or whatever, where you're like, look, let's just assume this because it's a good idea, even though there's no evidence for it.
Yeah. And also, I mean, if you're wanting to make the mechanism of evolution natural selection, you need that. Mm-hmm. But if you, like, the idea of life forms evolving, is not, I don't think that's a bad idea. It's just that I don't think we understand the mechanism. And
Right.
honestly, like, in a way, the catastrophes that deposit all of these life forms and fossilize them actually helps the idea.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because one of the arguments is, well, where's the evidence in the fossil record of these sort of halfway
Yeah.
between life forms and stuff? But,
Right.
well, the fossil record is not a complete record.
Right.
It's these tiny little increments of time where a bunch of stuff was just all laid down
Right.
at
It's
once.
a snapshot of a particular
Right.
instant. Yeah.
So if the normal taphonomic situation would be like to be preserved,
Then
Right.
there would be a much more complete record.
yeah, then we would be able to see and
Yeah.
we'd be able to follow this record all the way, and maybe we would see these gradual changes in life forms. But
Yeah.
because of the instantaneous nature of the deposits, basically, of all the catastrophic
Yes.
destruction of the life forms, it's not a gradual.
Right. And also, especially if that same catastrophe that takes the snapshot in the fossils is what then spurs the massive amounts of evolution after that.
That's right, yeah.
Taking place in a post-cataclysmic land where nothing's getting fossilized anymore.
Right.
Then you just have, a long time later, another catastrophe that takes a snapshot of a bunch of different life.
Right,
It's completely different.
Because it could be that leading up to a catastrophe, since you've had this pretty long span of time where you haven't had catastrophe, everything gets to a point to where there's sort of this equilibrium.
Right. It's somewhat static because
Right.
there's no more little ecological niches to fill.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they get all wiped out and a bunch of extinction happens, and then suddenly there's openings for stuff to
Right.
change. I agree with that.
Yeah.
That still doesn't explain the mechanism, but that does
Right.
explain the process, maybe.
But I understand that. I'm saying that because he was so desperate to have this mechanism, right? What you were just saying is that the idea of evolution was not new at the time.
Right. No.
He was trying to prove a mechanism or show, like,
Yeah.
here's a theory for a mechanism.
Right.
And so in order for that mechanism to work, then you have to get rid of the catastrophe part.
Yeah, that's right.
Which could be, that may have been the wrong direction to go. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess the assumption he was making was that all these changes have to take place very slowly.
Right.
And that was probably because he was trying to follow the uniformitarian model that Lyell was putting out, that you can only observe current processes. And so he's seeing, like, look, these birds on this island have a little bit longer beaks than the birds over there. Right? And so he's extrapolating into, like, well, if you give this millions and millions of years, they may actually turn into snakes. Right? I know that's backwards, birds. But yeah, I think snakes are better than birds. I would put them higher on the evolutionary chain than birds. Okay. But why did Darwin oppose the idea of great catastrophes in the past, contrary to his own field observations, and subscribe to the theory of uniformity of geological events in all ages and in the present? For species to evolve as the result of incessant competition and struggle for survival, all the way from the simplest forms up to Homo sapiens and other advanced organisms, an enormous span of time is required. The teaching of catastrophes appeared to make the story of the world very short. If the deluge occurred less than 5,000 years ago, then following the book of Genesis, creation took place less than 6,000 years ago. In order to have at the disposal of the evolutionary process the almost unlimited time needed, Darwin accepted Lyell's teaching, and whereas Lyell tried to show that the usual agents, such as rivers carrying sediment, act with comparative speed, Darwin liked to stress their sluggishness. He wrote, quote, "Therefore a man should examine for himself the great piles of superimposed strata, and watch the rivulets bringing down mud, and the waves wearing away the sea cliffs, in order to comprehend something about the duration of past time," unquote. The waves of the sea reduce a rock particle by particle, and if a visible change is produced, it requires many thousands of years. Okay, the geological record and changing forms of life. His thesis of the origin of species by natural selection, Darwin supported by reference to 1. Variations in domestic animals, especially when the breeder deliberately develops a certain desirable feature, and 2. The anatomical similarity of many related species, and 3. The geological record. However, though breeders have created new races or variations, they have created no new animal species. In the anatomy of living creatures, the, quote, "the distinctness of the specific forms and their not being blended together by innumerable transitional links is a very obvious difficulty," which was Darwin. And thus the entire weight of proof was placed on the geological record. So I think what Darwin is pointing out that the distinctness of all the forms of animals that they find, both living and extinct, and that there aren't innumerable links between them, is a difficulty, and that put the proof of like whether there was a lot of time on the geological record. I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, thank you.
So this record shows, however, the forms of life changing almost simultaneously throughout the world. This title of a section in The Origin of Species. Darwin wrote, quote, "Scarcely any paleontological discovery is more striking than the fact that the forms of life change almost simultaneously throughout the world," unquote. This appears baffling because according to his theory, quote, "the process of modification must be slow and will generally affect only a few species at the same time, for the variability of each species is independent of that of all others," unquote.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the
Points to catastrophe again.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What kind of answer to his problem, therefore, could Darwin propose? Quote, "Blank intervals of vast duration, as far as the fossils are concerned, occurred. During these long and blank intervals, I suppose that the inhabitants of each region underwent a considerable amount of modification and extinction," unquote. Hence, the parallelism of changes in fauna and flora in similar strata around the world is not a true time parallelism. Quote, "The order would falsely appear to be strictly parallel," unquote. So again, we're inserting a whole bunch of assumptions in order to make it not be what it looks like. In other words, like this idea of science is the simplest explanation is probably the best one. They are completely violating that with these. Because the simplest explanation is like, wow, catastrophes cause these layers and fill these fossils up. And then something happens quickly after that to where a bunch of new types of animals appear. And then there's another catastrophe eventually that's what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
And that would be the simplest explanation. And that's what Cuvier and Sedgwick and all these original geologists were going with. That was the idea.
But again, you lose the mechanism.
Right.
See, I mean, that's the name of his book, Origin of Species by Natural Selection.
Yeah. Right. But I mean, natural selection could happen really fast after a catastrophe, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it's not to say that the mechanism is even wrong.
Well, that's true. I don't know.
Yeah. Darwin then considered the absence of numerous intermediate varieties in any single formation and wrote, quote, "If we confine our attention to any one formation, it becomes much more difficult to understand why we do not therein find closely graduated varieties between the allied species which live at its commencement and its close," unquote. And he found the answer in the conjecture that, quote, "Although each formation may mark a very long lapse of years, each probably is short compared with the period requisite to change one species into another," unquote. So I think he's saying there that when you consider any single layer with its fossils in it, he's assuming that the bottom part of the layer is the earliest part of that period. And that the layer is like, so where we would say maybe that a single catastrophe puts that layer down. Mm-hmm. He's saying, no. Millions of years are taking place to put this layer down. Even though it's got, so then you have a whole fossil that spans 5 million years. Because it's like a shell, right? But he's saying, well, how come there aren't intermediate, like in other words, the species found at the bottom of this layer are the same as the species found at the top and there's no change.
Right.
So then he's saying, oh, well, this gives me even more time, because if I can assume that layer was laid down over millions of years and only a small amount of evolution took place or none, then it must mean that we have a lot more time. That's what he says. Although each formation may mark a very long lapse of years, each probably is very short compared with the period requisite to change one species into another. So in other words, that strata represents a short time, geologically speaking, even though he thinks it's a long time. In terms of
it's weird.
Yeah, they're having to run around in circles, right? Furthermore, the geological record shows, quote, "the sudden appearance of whole groups of allied species." This is the title of another section in The Origin of Species. So Darwin says, quote, "The abrupt manner in which whole groups of species suddenly appear in certain formations has been urged by several paleontologists, for instance by Agassiz and Pictet and Sedgwick, as a fatal objection to the belief in the transmutation of species. If numerous species belonging to the same genera or families have really started into life at once, the fact would be fatal to the theory of evolution through natural selection. For the development by this means of a group of forms, all of which are descended from some one progenitor, must have been an extremely slow process, and the progenitors must have lived long before their modified descendants," unquote. The geological record of extinction of species is discussed under the heading "On Extinction." So Darwin wrote, quote, "The extinction of species has been involved in the most gratuitous mystery," unquote. "What took place is, quote, apparently sudden extermination of whole families or orders," unquote. So according to his theory, quote, "the extinction of a whole group of species is generally a slower process than their production, and yet some groups were exterminated wonderfully sudden. Here once more, Darwin thought that the imperfection of the geological record may in some cases simulate the suddenness of the extinction, but he acknowledged in other cases his inability to explain the spontaneity of the extinction of some species. He still wondered, as in the days of his South American travels, why horses had disappeared in pre-Columbian America, where they had every favorable condition for propagation. And in a letter to Sir Henry H. Haworth, he acknowledged his inability to explain the extinction of the mammoth, which was a well-adapted animal. But in general, the deficiency of the geological record was invoked to explain the apparent spontaneity of extinction, as well as the suddenness with which new species seemed to arrive on the scene. So I think the key there is, in general, the deficiency of the geological record, which is being assumed, is used to explain why it looks sudden. Right? That's just basically what he's saying. There are no deficiencies in the geological record. You're assuming they're there, and then you're saying that those assumed, not apparent, not visual, not present deficiencies explain the problems with your theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Snakes! Going long on the Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Fastest 3 hours?
Could be 3 hours.
In podcasting. And almost done with the book. We're gonna. This is gonna be the last.
Yeah, I think we're just gonna plow through it
of
here.
the Earth and Upheaval shows.
This is the final bit of the book, and I think it's the final chapter, and he's just kind of going through Darwin's stuff. So
it's hard to follow some of the way he
the way Darwin writes, yeah. So Darwin explained the migration of plants from continent to continent and from mainland to islands by the transportation of seeds in the intestines of birds, the migration of mollusks by observed instances of small shells clinging to the legs of migrating birds. This method of dispersion does not account for the geographical distribution of larger animals unable to fly or swim across the sea or traverse climatic zones unsuitable for the species, right? Like birds did not bring mammoths to to North America.
An African or a European swallow.
That's probably how coconuts got to Britain, though. Darwin accepted Agassiz's teaching, though not in its original form with the catastrophic beginning of the Ice Age. But Agassiz rejected Darwin's theory. The reason for this he saw in the skeletal remains of ancient fish, a field in which he was an authority. In many instances, the fish of extinct species were better developed and further advanced in their evolution than later species, the modern ones included. Among mammals, too, many better developed species became extinct, but these difficulties in the way of the evolutionary theory were less strongly felt in the heat of the fight against the opponents who insisted on a 6,000-year-old world and the immutability of species.
I never thought about that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Better developed. I mean, I know you were talking about that with the mammoths and their teeth and everything, but
yeah, this guy's saying like Permian fish were better developed than modern ones. I mean, it's a how do you tell? Like you just say like, wow, they look awesome.
I don't know. I haven't studied all the fish.
Right. I'm just wondering. I was thinking to myself, how do we know what's better developed or not?
Well, if you have something that zaps, and you also have slime that poisons, and you also have really sharp teeth that can rip, and then you have fingers on your fins, and I mean, you look at something like that, and you're like, wow,
yeah,
that thing's. That thing's got it made.
Right, yeah. He's got tentacles around his mouth, and I mean, he's he's a Cthulhu fish.
He's got a light on his forehead. Okay, this guy's awesome.
Highly developed. Darwin's Origin of Species, Huxley went on, was badly received by the generation to which it was first addressed, and the outpouring of angry nonsense to which it gave rise is sad to think upon. But the present generation will probably behave just as badly if another Darwin should arise and inflict upon them that which the generality of mankind most hate, the necessity of revising their convictions.
Happening today.
Yeah. Let them, then, be charitable to us ancients, and if they behave no better than the men of my day to some new benefactor, let them recollect that, after all, our wrath did not come to much, and vented itself chiefly in the bad language of sanctimonious scolding. Let them as speedily perform a strategic right about face, and follow the truth wherever it leads. The opponents of the new truth will discover, as those of Darwin are doing, that, after all, theories do not alter facts, and that the universe remains unaffected, even though texts crumble. The mechanism of evolution. So, natural selection, the Darwinian mechanism of evolution, is simultaneously destructive and constructive. In the struggle for existence, it eliminates all the unfit among the members of a species, and it destroys the species that cannot compete with others for the limited resources of livelihood. The winners in this struggle are those individuals that, because of some characteristic or favorable variation, have an edge over their other competitors. Under these circumstances, favorable variations would tend to be preserved and unfavorable ones destroyed. The result of this would be the formation of new species. As shown on previous pages, the annihilation of many individuals of entire species in the animal kingdom took place not only under circumstances of competition, but under catastrophic conditions as well. Entire species with no signs of degeneration suddenly came to their end in paroxysms of nature, yet extinction of a species through starvation or extermination by enemies also takes place. Moa, the giant flightless bird of New Zealand that stood 12 feet high, was destroyed several centuries ago. The whooping cranes of North America were reduced by 1953 to 21 individuals. Natural selection cannot account for the wholesale destruction of many genera and species at one time. It may occasionally be the agent exterminating single species, but can natural selection create new species? That's a good point. We do see extinctions. We don't see new guys coming around.
Well, yeah.
Maybe we do.
I mean, we're finding new types of life.
Right, so we don't know.
We don't know if they're...
We don't have a complete record, so it's hard to tell if something new shows up.
Exactly.
Yeah, or maybe the ones we're finding are actually new. They weren't there before.
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah, okay. The animal and plant kingdoms are subdivided into phyla, and these into classes, orders, families, genera, and finally species. A species can be recognized this way. The mating of members of two different species generally does not produce offspring, and when it does, such offspring is sterile. Horse and donkey, their offspring, the mule. Thus all the human race is but one species, and all races of dogs, so dissimilar in their body structures, are members of one species. There are hundreds of thousands of species in the animal kingdom and also in the plant kingdom. Since the first scientific observations were made, no truly new animal species has been observed to come into being. The year after publication of The Origin of Species, Thomas Huxley wrote, quote, "But there is no positive evidence at present that any group of animals has, by variation and selective breeding, given rise to another group which was, even in the least degree, infertile with the first," unquote.
Mm-hmm.
A few years later, Darwin wrote in a letter, quote, "The belief in natural selection must at present be grounded entirely on general considerations. When we descend to details, we cannot prove that a single species has changed, nor can we prove that the supposed changes are beneficial, which is the groundwork of the theory," unquote. And at the end of the century, Huxley found himself compelled to make this statement, quote, "I remain of the opinion that until selective breeding is definitely proved to give rise to varieties infertile with one another, the logical foundation of the theory of natural selection is incomplete. We still remain very much in the dark about the causes of variations," unquote. In selective breeding, the breeder creates conditions not found in wildlife, and new races or varieties of animals created by selection and isolation revert to their ancestral unselected forms as soon as they are turned free. Thus, when dogs of various breeds mate, they give birth to mongrels, which resemble their common ancestors. Despite all their efforts, breeders have not been able to cross the true frontier of species. So then how could a new species originate in chance variations and through crossbreeding in wildlife? And how could so many new species be produced that they number, together with the extinct ones, in the millions? And how could a human being so complicated evolve not just from common ancestors with the primates, but from common ancestors with winged insects and crawling worms? The evolutionists drew more checks on time.
Yep. That's a really good I don't know what it's called, but test, right? Like if you can breed something into something until it can't breed with what you started with.
Yeah. Then you have crossed the species boundary. Yeah. That is a good falsification test. Yeah. So the neo-Darwinists deny that physical surroundings can give rise to new species. They may bring about changes in an organism, but the acquired characteristics are not inheritable. Can, then, natural selection or competition with other animals create new species? The classic example of a giraffe with the longest neck surviving when leaves are left only high on the trees does not prove that giraffes with longer necks would become a separate species. And in any event, under the described conditions, no new race could evolve. The female giraffes, which are smaller in stature, would die out before the male competitors, and there would be no progeny. But should there be progeny, the young giraffes would die because they would be unable to reach any leaves.
That's a good point. Yeah, they got these long necks because the only thing they could eat was up high. But their babies are tiny. Shh. That's brilliant. God, I love that.
Darwin thought to explain the origin of various secondary sexual characteristics such as ornamentation and color of feathers in birds, by saying that they were the results of gradual selection through many generations of traits attractive in the eyes of the female. But it has been shown that when the colorful wings of male butterflies were cut off, and in their stead female wings, often without any characteristic coloring, were glued to the body of the male butterfly, the females did not object to the approach of the male. She failed to discriminate against male butterflies with no wings at all. Also, it was observed that some male fish fertilize the fish eggs, having all the male coloring characteristics of such a season, but without the female fish even being present or aware of the act of fertilization. The theory of sexual selection to a certain degree had the same fate as other theories, but the theory of natural selection would not yield its position unless a better explanation of the evolutionary mechanism could be given. Wow, I love it. Yeah, it's for science. Let's glue these other wings onto this butterfly and see what happens. Do it for science, cool. Guy. If I take these wings off and then glue these really ugly bat wings onto this thing, can he still have sex? Yes, he can, because it's not about the color of the wings.
That's crazy. I mean, so much of this stuff, like, the videos and stuff, all about the, I'm right. Thinking of like these birds that have like all these crazy colors, and it's, this is to attract the female.
Yeah.
They do these dances and stuff. Which I feel like, that one's a really good dancer.
Right. Whereas actually most of them are probably like, he shouldn't do that in public. We've tried to tell him, but he thinks he's a badass. We all know people like that.
Yeah. It is really interesting though.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
And he's right about the fish, that female fish has nothing to do with it. She puts the eggs down, takes off, the male comes and fertilizes later. She doesn't have any pick.
Right. But the colors could have, they obviously have some other purpose then. It's not mating.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? I don't know. I mean, a lot of butterfly coloring is there's like two kinds. There's the kind that are like really beautiful and flashy, and then there's the kind that like makes them turn invisible when they sit on a tree, right?
Yeah.
So spontaneous mutations are far too few and insufficient in magnitude to bring about the appearance of new species and to explain how the world of animals came into existence. Despite all spontaneous variations, no new species of animals are known to have been created since the close of the Ice Age. In 1907, V.L. Kellogg of Stanford University came to the following conclusion. Quote, "The fair truth is that the Darwinian selection theories, considered with regard to their claimed capacity to be an independently sufficient mechanical explanation of descent, stand today seriously discredited in the biological world. On the other hand, it is also fair truth to say that no replacing hypothesis or theory of species forming has been offered by the opponents of selection, which is met with any general or even considerable acceptance by naturalists. Mutations seem to be too few and far between. For orthogenesis, we can discover no satisfactory mechanism, and the same is true for the Lamarckian theories of modification by the accumulation through inheritance of acquired or ontogenic characters." Unquote. I think what he's saying there is like biologists don't really, they think that this mechanism of natural selection doesn't really doesn't work, but on the other hand, there's no one has offered anything
right
to supplant it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
That's a fair explanation.
Yeah, the Feynman talks about that too. It's like, well, we have this standard model, and it's not right, and it's not complete, and some parts of it are really, we have kind of to like just deal with these bad ideas, but we don't have a better one.
Right.
But
that doesn't mean we should keep going with the bad one. That's my problem with Feynman's idea on that. I'm like, okay, so we don't have a better idea, but that doesn't mean we keep saying, well, this is the model of the universe, because we know it doesn't work. Right. So it's like,
well, it's more complicated than that. It works in some instances. It doesn't work across the board. So there's some other detail. So that's why he uses the chess analogy.
Yeah.
It's like you can learn all these rules of chess, and then somebody does castling, and then you're like, I thought I knew all the rules of chess.
Yeah.
But because castling only happens in this very specific circumstance, it would take you a lot of games of chess to actually
observe that process.
Yeah, and then when you try to do it, they say, no, you can't. Well, why? And you have to look at your board and be like, why can't I do it? And then he does it in the next move. You're like, what was it?
Yeah.
So it's not that, if the standard model is castling doesn't exist, then you would obviously be like, okay, that's wrong once castling happens.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you would say, well, okay, then these moves that I've figured out are wrong, right? You don't know all the rules is the point.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know, I guess.
But that should teach, so like you might go a long time thinking you knew all the rules and you'd be like, okay, I got this game figured out.
Yeah.
But then once castling happened, if you were if like the assumption is being made that whoever's making the moves is following the game right.
Right, yeah.
Right? So like
Yes.
you're observing the universe, you can't say you can't do that. Because,
Yeah, you're playing a computer, right?
right. So you see it happen, all of a sudden that should rearrange your entire idea of what you thought about your understanding of the game.
Right.
Now you might say, okay, so these other moves still work, but I just saw something that make me throw away the idea that I totally understood this game.
Right.
This is not happening with the standard model, I think.
I understand that. I mean, people like Feynman, I think, were...
They understood that.
Yeah, he understood that. And it's just the point is that, like, well, we don't have this idea works in so many ways, just like Newtonian physics works.
Yeah.
So we're still using it, even though we've discovered this whole other aspect of physics that makes us question everything.
Right.
You know, how can it possibly work this way?
Yeah.
But we're not going to throw away Newtonian physics because that works for all of the stuff that we're doing out here. Right?
Yeah.
We can.
So the difference with this is that, like, the unfairness about comparing this to Newtonian physics is we've never observed this take place.
I understand.
And yet it's still the standard
Bad
model.
analogy problem.
No, it's not a bad analogy. You just jump to physics. And I'm just like, yeah, you're right. In physics, a lot of the physics we have observed, like, yeah, we see all these orbits and like maybe our calculations they're not quite right. They're off by decimals or whatever, you know, like small fractions of when we're trying to calculate orbits, there's little perturbations that we don't understand, you know, and maybe these are caused by relativity, maybe they're caused by quantum stuff we don't quite know yet. But for the most part, all these observations are made. But with this, it's completely the opposite. This whole theory has been built up on something that has never been observed to take place.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that it's a great idea to stick with it. I'm pointing out that it's a good point that, like, well...
Let's stick with it because we don't have anything else?
That's kind of, when you have an establishment, that's what happens. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it is a good point that, like, well, unless you can present a new idea that fits all of the data, yet tells you something new, right, then... It's like, yeah, you're not going to overturn the establishment. That's the point. Not that.
Yeah, I guess I'm. You're right. You're not going to overturn it. My point is, like, if it was a perfect world, we would just present the data and say we don't know why this works this way.
I agree.
But of course, that's never going to happen.
Exactly.
Now the problem is the establishment is so dug in. The fact that they teach this as the standard model, it makes it much, much harder to say, well, we don't actually know what's going on, and let's find a new idea, because a lot of people think that this is what happens.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay. So Kellogg also observed that one group of scientists, quote, denies in toto any effectiveness or capacity for species forming on the part of natural selection, while the other group, a larger, sees in natural selection an evolutionary factor capable of initiating nothing, dependent wholly for any effectiveness on some primary factor or factors controlling the origin and direction of variation, but capable of extinguishing all unadapted, unfit lines of development. For my part, Kellogg concluded, it seems better to go back to the old and safe ignoramus standpoint. That's what I'm saying. Let's go back to saying
Let's go back to the ignoramus.
Right, we don't know. Yeah. Thus, the entire problem was shunted back to the place it occupied before the origin of the species.
Yeah, and I need to correct that. What Feynman was saying was that it's easy to say this whole theory is bunk. The hard thing is to come up with a better one.
Right.
That's really what his point was in saying that, so I should put that in there.
And as long as he wasn't saying that just because that's easy, we shouldn't do it.
No, no, of
like
course
that,
not.
Right.
He was saying that there's all these critics, right? Critics of the theory. And yeah, there's holes in the theory. We don't fully understand it.
Yeah.
It's easy to criticize the theory. The hard thing is to come up with a better one.
Sometimes it's not easy to criticize theory. You get destroyed, guy. You know, you get destroyed, guy.
God dang it. Forget it. You're right. It's very difficult sometimes to criticize things.
I mean, it's easy to do it, right? It's easy to be like, yeah, this is all wrong. but it's not easy to keep your job sometimes. if
That's
you do
true.
that. I don't know. I'm not really arguing with you. I'm just,
I know.
I'm just being an asshole. L.T. Moore, in a series of guest lectures delivered at Princeton University, asked, quote, if natural selection is a force which can destroy but cannot create species, and if the reasons for this destruction are unknown, of what value is this theory to mankind? The collapse of the theory of natural selection leaves the philosophy of mechanistic materialism in a sorry plight, unquote. If, as the experiments with the vinegar fly demonstrated, a mutation of some gene can produce a wingless fly, many mutations simultaneously or in quick succession would be quite able to transform an animal or plant into a new species. In the bomb craters of London, new plants not previously known on the British Isles, and possibly not known anywhere, were seen to sprout. Quote, rare plants, unknown to modern British botany, were discovered in bomb craters and ruins of London in 1943. Unquote. It appears that the thermal action of bomb explosions was the cause of multiple metamorphoses in the genes of seeds and pollens. If this is so, then the statement made earlier that no new species have been observed in the process of making its first appearance must be retracted.
Yep.
All right. The fact that some organisms, like foraminifera, survived all geological ages without participating in evolution, a point of perplexity in the theory of natural selection, would be explained by catastrophic evolution in which many species would be destroyed, others would be subjected to multiple mutations, and some specimens of species would escape mutation and procreate their old forms. The fact that the geological record shows a sudden emergence of many new forms at the beginning of each geological age does not require the artificial explanation that the records are always defective. The geological records truly reflect the changes in the animal and plant worlds from one period of geological time to the next. Many of the new species evolved in the wake of global catastrophe at the beginning of a new age and were entombed in a subsequent paroxysm of nature at the end of that age. The fact stressed by Agassiz that numerous earlier species of fish showed a more highly developed organism when compared with later species of fish can be explained by the destruction of earlier forms, but not in the process of competition, but in upheavals against which superior structure is no defense. So that's a really twisted way of saying that, like, their superior forms had no defense against catastrophe. Right? So it's, in other words, you may be superior in your formation, or a particular species may be, but once a global catastrophe comes down, that all that changes.
Right.
The observation that healthy species of animals, like mammoths, with no sign of degeneration suddenly became extinct, greatly troubled the evolutionists. This fact is unexplainable by natural selection or the principle of competition. Not so by the catastrophic intervention of nature. The fact that at several stages of the past, many animals of various species and many species in toto were rather suddenly exterminated in conflict with the idea of slow extinction and natural selection conforms with the theory of cataclysmic evolution. The enigmatic observation that the larger animals were particularly subject to extinction, the giant mammals that succumbed at the end of the Tertiary, and again in the Pleistocene, as earlier the dinosaurs did, is comprehensible if one thinks of the better chances smaller animals have of finding refuge from the ravages of nature. Which is a point I was making, I think, on Cosmographia, where I was saying, like, it's the top of the food chain, or whatever you think of it, the pyramid of advanced species of animals that gets wiped out by cataclysms. And the stronger the cataclysm, the farther down the pyramid it goes. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think some people were pointing out, well, herbivores aren't at the top of the food chain, but a mammoth is at the top of the food chain, and it's an herbivore. Right. It's at the top of the food chain because almost nothing eats it.
Almost nothing hunts it on the reg.
Yeah. The theory of evolution is vindicated by catastrophic events in the Earth's past. The proclaimed enemy of this theory proved to be its only ally. The real enemy of the theory of evolution is the teaching of uniformity, or the non-occurrence of any extraordinary events in the past. This teaching, called by Darwin the mainstay of the theory of evolution, almost set the theory apart from reality. I like that. Okay. Chapter 16, The End. In the present book, the testimony of stone and bone has been written down. We have listened to witnesses of various epochs, old and recent, of different latitudes north and south, of various origins from mountain peak and ocean bottom skeletons and ashes and lava. Long before the crowd of witnesses finished filing by, we knew that we would not be able to evade the conclusion that global catastrophes have shaken this world of ours. I have not included here the testimony of ancient literary sources or of folklore. Shall I be confronted with the arguments that, though the geological and archaeological records speak for the catastrophic occurrences in the past, the absence of human testimony contradicts this interpretation of the geological record of recent date? Is not Worlds in Collision a book of human evidence? And was not this testimony disputed because, first of all, of a presumed conflict with the findings of geology? Although no references to historical inscriptions or to literary monuments of ancient times have been added here to show correspondence between the geological and historical records, no attentive reader, not even a cursory peruser of these pages, could have read them without associating their content with that of many chapters of Worlds in Collision, if he had read the other book too. There the story was told of hurricanes of global magnitude, of forests burning and swept away, of dust, stones, fire, and ashes falling from the sky, of mountains melting like wax, of lava flowing from riven ground, of boiling seas and bituminous rain, of shaking ground and destroyed cities, of humans seeking refuge in caverns and fissures in the rocks and the mountains, of oceans upheaved and falling on the land, of tidal waves moving toward the poles and back, of land becoming sea by submersion and the expanse of sea turning into deserts, islands born and others drowned, mountain ridges leveled and others rising, of crowds of rivers seeking new beds, of sources that disappeared and others that became bitter, of great destructions in the animal kingdom, of decimated mankind, of migrations, of heavy clouds of dust covering the face of the earth for decades, of magnetic disturbances, of changed climates, of displaced cardinal points and altered latitudes, of disrupted calendars and of sundials and water clocks that point to changed lengths of days, months, and years of a new polar star. All of this was presented in Worlds in Collision as having taken place in two series of events, the first in the 15th century before the present era, or 34 centuries ago, and the other of lesser intensity in the 8th century and at the beginning of the 7th, 27 centuries ago. Events of a similar nature and on an even more grandiose scale took place also in earlier ages. The narration of some of these events, as far as the human memory retained their recollection, is reserved for another volume, a sequel to Worlds in Collision. Whenever we investigate the geological and paleontological records of this Earth, we find signs of catastrophes and upheavals old and recent. Mountains sprang from plains, and other mountains were leveled. Strata of the terrestrial crust were folded and pressed together and overturned and moved and put on tops of other formations. Igneous rock melted and flooded enormous areas of land with mile-thick sheets. The ocean bed flowed with molten rock. Ashes showered down and built layers many yards thick on the ground, and on the bottom of the oceans, in their vast expanses, shores of ancient lakes were tilted and are no longer horizontal. Sea coasts show subsidence or emergence, and in some places over 1,000 feet, rocks of the earth are filled with the remains of life extinguished in a state of agony. Sedimentary rocks are one vast graveyard, and the granite and basalt, too, have embedded in them numberless living organisms. And shells have closed valves as they do in a living state, so unexpectedly came the entombment, and vast forests were burned and washed away and covered with the waters of the seas and with sand and turned into coal. And animals were swept to the far north and thrown into heaps and were soaked by bituminous outpourings. And broken bones and torn ligaments of the skins of animals of living species and extinct were smashed together with splintered forest into huge piles, and whales were cast out of the oceans and onto mountains, and rocks from disintegrating mountain ridges were carried over vast stretches of land from Norway to the Carpathians, and into the Harz Mountains and into Scotland, and from Mount Blanc to the Juras, and from Labrador to the Poconos. And the Rocky Mountains moved many leagues from their places, and the Alps traveled 100 miles northwards. And the Himalayas and the Andes climbed ever higher, and the mountain lakes emptied themselves over barriers, and continents were torn by rifts, and the sea bottoms by canyons, and land disappeared under the sea, and the sea pushed new islands from its bottom, and seabeds were turned into high mountains bearing seashells, and shoals of fish were poisoned and boiled in the seas, and numberless rivers lost their channels, were dammed by lava and turned upstream, and the climate suddenly changed, Tillable land and meadows turned into vast deserts. Reindeer from Lapland and polar fox and Arctic bears from the snowy tundras and rhinoceroses and hippopotami from the African jungles and lions from the deserts and ostriches and seals were thrown into piles and covered with gravel, clay, and tuff, and the fissures of multitudes of rocks are filled with broken bones. Regions where the palm grew were moved into the Arctic, and oceans steamed, and the evaporated seas condensed under clouds of dust and built mountainous covers of ice over great stretches of continents. And the ice melted on heated ground and cast icebergs into the oceans in enormous fleets. And all volcanoes erupted, and all human dwellings were shattered and burned, and animals tame and fierce, and human beings with them ran for refuge to mountain caves. And mountains swallowed and entombed those that reached the refuge, and many species and genera and families of the animal kingdom were annihilated down to the very last one. And the earth and the sea and the sky again and again united their elements in one great work of destruction. Following the trail of geology, we were led by merciless logic of facts and figures to the conclusion that the earth was more than once a stage on which acts of a great drama took place, and no place on earth was free of these effects. In the face of the evidence, we were also compelled to concede that the most recent paroxysms of nature happened in historical times, maybe only a few thousand years ago, when in some parts of the world civilization was already entering the Iron Age, but in other parts still lingering in the Neolithic or even in the Paleolithic or Rude Stone Age. The laminations of lakes, the salt content of those without outflow, the retreat of waterfalls, the elevation of mountains, pollen analysis, and archaeological finds, as well as the recent drop of ocean level, all show how close to our time must have occurred some of the more recent paroxysms of nature. The evidence is also overwhelming that the great global catastrophes were either accompanied or caused by shifting of the terrestrial axis or by a disturbance in the diurnal and annual motions of the Earth. The shifting of the axis could not have been brought about by internal causes, as the proponents of the Ice Age theory in the 19th century assumed it was. It must have occurred, and repeatedly, under the impact of external forces. The state of lavas with reversed magnetization, hundreds of times more intensive than the inverted terrestrial magnetic field could impart, reveals the nature of the forces that were in action. Thus, from the geological evidence, we came to the conclusion, to which we had also arrived, traveling the road of the historical and literary traditions of the peoples of the world, that the Earth repeatedly went through cataclysmic events on a global scale, that the cause of these events was an extraterrestrial agent, and that some of these cosmic catastrophes took place only a few thousand years ago in historical times. Many worldwide phenomena, for each of which the cause is vainly sought, are explained by a single cause: the sudden changes of climate, transgression of the sea, vast volcanic and seismic activities, formation of ice cover, pluvial crises, emergence of mountains and their dislocation, rising and subsidence of coasts, tilting of lakes, sedimentation, fossilization, the provenance of tropical animals and plants in polar regions, conglomerates of fossil animals of various latitudes and habitats, the extinction of species and genera, the appearance of new species, the reversal of the Earth's magnetic fields, and a score of other worldwide phenomena. As important as the world catastrophes conclusion is, it grows in significance for almost every branch of science when, to the ensuing question, of old or of recent time, and the answer is given of old and of recent times. There were global catastrophes in pre-human times, in prehistoric times, and in historical times. We are descendants of survivors, themselves descendants of survivors. We read here a few pages from the logbook of the Earth, a rock rolling in space, circling with its attendant lifeless satellite around a fire-breathing star, moving with its primary and other revolving planets through the galaxy of the Milky Way of hundreds of millions of burning stars, and together with this entire host, through the void of the universe. End of book.
Man, that was fantastic.
Yeah, that was great. I knew I had to read that entire end thing there. So that was Earth in Upheaval, folks. I think one of Velikovsky's best books. And that reminds me, I read a comment from somebody on the last show about a book he recommended called, what was it? Stargazers and Gravediggers or something like that? Yeah. And I was like, well, I don't know what that is. And he says that's a Velikovsky's book that was published posthumously. Post-posthumous publication.
That's right.
So I guess that's he's saying we should check it out because it was the last thing he wrote and it was
Cool.
published after he died. Anyway,
Guy was a great writer.
I think he said it all there at the end.
Yep.
We're all going to die, which is how I started this show. Everything dies. I mean, we're surrounded by the bones of stuff that died all at once. We're all going to die. But everything's okay.
We got to get to space.
Yeah. All right. I think that's the end of the show.
Yeah.
You got anything else?
Nope.
I mean, I can't really top that.
I'm not going to follow that up.
What he said is
Yeah.
what we were saying. Yeah. All right. You guys can get a hold of us, brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. Check out the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. By the way, I have added a section there called Archived Episodes, where it makes it a lot easier for people to access the old episodes that are not available in the feed now. So they're just all a whole bunch of links, numbered episode 2 through 70, I think I put on there. Plus at the bottom, there's links to get our little fun shorts like Randall Carlson in 1 minute and Dolman School and, the Bots commercial, stuff like that. Serious podcast. So check that out. It's called Archived Episodes. It's a new section of the website. Also, check out the Encyclopedia and the Glossary, or the Snake Skins, which is our merchandise store. Check out the Pyramid Scheme. Support us and the show on Patreon or by PayPal. We really appreciate that.
Yep. Thanks to everybody who is supporting.
Yep.
Very much. Very much.
Thanks to everybody who is
Appreciate
supporting
it.
very much. Yes, and if you want to support, that would be great. It's right there on the right of the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. Also, give us reviews wherever you can. There are new reviews that came in, and I forgot to read them on this show, but that's okay because this show went long. So I'll do them next week. So thanks to you guys. When I say this, you guys are going out there and putting reviews on iTunes. That really helps. It really, really does.
Yeah.
So if you're a new listener and you love the show, or if you're an old listener and you haven't done it yet, what's wrong with you? Go to iTunes and give us a good review, guy. All right?
Or gal.
Yeah. Share the shows wherever you can. Follow us on Twitter @SnakeBros_Noval, SNKBRS. Join the Facebook group, which is run by Jordan. Join the Discord chat, which is run by Jeff, who also runs the Library of the Serpent. The Discord chat is a great place. It's growing fast. You can find a link to it on the website. So if you go to the website, also look up on the right in the little menu there. It says the Snake Pit Discord chat. Go in there and there's a little widget with a connect button. Don't forget about History Shift. You can find him on YouTube and on Twitter @History Shift. He makes all of our videos. So if you're watching this or listening to this on YouTube, this is his work. And we thank him very much as part of the value
buddy.
for value model. He does a lot of work for us, so he's awesome.
And he just sent us this awesome piece of smoky quartz.
That's right. He still needs to learn how to write, though. His handwriting is awful. But his presents are great.
Yeah.
And his videos are good. Also, Pod Doodles. You can find him on YouTube and on Twitter. He takes our podcasts and draw doodles while listening to them, and then you can watch as a video the doodle like taking place while you listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Also, Cosmographia, which we do with Randall Carlson. Also, we have a Reddit subreddit. So you can find us r/Brothers of the Serpent on Reddit.
Yeah.
Go there and give us some upvotes.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, I talked about this a little bit last time, but I had to verify with Russ that he wants to do this, or maybe this could be part of the new website idea, but we're talking about the Patreon supporters. I read off a list of names of people who are supporting us at $10 a month or more.
Yeah.
And so the idea is when we go on these expeditions, we're going to basically be taking pictures and maybe do a little write-up of the expedition, archive it on the website,
Yeah.
and then list all those names of the people who made that possible.
Right.
So just wanted to let y'all know we are going to go forward with that, whether it's on Russ's site,
Old school, bad website,
or the new site.
awesome one.
Yeah. So we want to be able to give you guys credit where credit is due. So
Yeah, for sure.
we're going to make that public. And I guess if you want, when it comes to that time, if you don't want your name published or your full name, we can do alias or first name only. Just once we get there, we'll let you know, and you let us know, and we'll make that happen.
Right, you come up with your own title, like Propinator, It's a great names, we know who you are. The Propinator. Let's see, what else? Oh, yeah, so we are going on this expedition. We talked a little bit about it last time, and it is because of all of you guys, and that is still moving forward. We're really excited about it, and we are going to be taking podcast stuff, and Ben from Uncharted X is bringing podcast stuff and cameras, so we are going to have material to show you guys, and of course we're going to tell you about it, but we probably also will do on-site recording and stuff like that, so we'll have both. We'll have the material from when we were there, and then we'll come back here and sort of give summaries of the whole thing, right? So it's going to be awesome. And we're doing it with Chris Cottrell from Dabbler's Den, and Ben from Uncharted X, and George Howard. So this is going to be fantastic.
Cosmic Tusk.
Yeah, the old cosmictusk.com. So thanks to Soraya from Where Did the Road Go, Ben from Uncharted X, Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape, the C Word podcast, Grimerica, and Conspiranormal. And by the way, the C Word just started their series on the Great Pyramid and other ancient megalithic structures, so you guys should check that out, because I listened to it and it was awesome and hilarious.
Yeah.
So they've published their first one on checking out the Great Pyramid and other evidence of advanced technology in ancient Egypt. So I suggest you check it out. That's the C Word podcast. All right, guys.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We love you. We always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.
That's right. Snakes are better than birds.